Hey friends, tonight we step quietly past velvet curtains into a room where lamplight glows like warm honey over lace, and the air carries the soft trace of coal smoke and lavender water. You smooth your collar, inhale the hush, and prepare your most innocent expression, because you are about to visit the most proper society on earth, one that hides a very crowded closet behind impeccable manners. In this parlor, a folded fichu rests beside a prayer book, and a pair of boots waits by the hearth like patient hounds. You already feel a hush settle over your shoulders, the hush of rules and rituals drawn, tight as a corset by an aunt with too many opinions. Welcome to Victorian England, where appearances are everything and restraint is considered the finest art. So before you get comfortable, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these little journeys through time. Tell me where you're watching from and what hour your clock reads. I love imagining all of us scattered across the world, yet sharing this same moment. Now, dim the lights, let the fan hum softly in the background, and let's slip together into tonight's story, where propriety glimmers like silk and secrets hide beneath the lace. Now picture the scene. It could be 1845, or perhaps 1895. The calendar shifts, but the mood does not. The air hums with the same promise of order and steadiness. Queen Victoria sits on the throne, her portrait gazing down from parlor walls like a quiet guardian of virtue, the saint of domestic life. Beneath that gaze, you straighten your gloves, aware that even small gestures are performances in this theater of respectability. Every lace, every glance, every pause is charged with meaning. You breathe carefully, as if the room itself is listening, and in a way, it is. This is an age where appearance is not vanity, but survival. Outside, the streets smell of rain, horsehair, and fresh bread. Gaslight turns puddles into gold coins. Gentlemen pass with chins held high, umbrellas like declarations of dignity. You are expected to move through this world as if made of porcelain and good intentions. The visible rules arrive first. Ladies' ankles are scandalous. Gentlemen never utter the word leg at dinner. Instead, they politely refer to it as a support. Imagine the waiter's straight face as someone requests the support of their chair be tightened. It's absurd and dignified all at once, precisely the Victorian way. Etiquette manuals pile high on mantels, teaching when to bow, when to call, and which topics are safe. Weather, poetry, coal prices, as long as you don't sound political. Desire, of course, is unsafe, yet it seeps through the edges of every sentence like candlelight through lace. Then come the invisible rules. You learn them from the tilt of a chaperone's fan or the polite cough of a clergyman. Respectability is a fragile currency, easy to lose and slow to regain. A gaze held too long tells a forbidden story. A laugh too loud whispers danger. The parlor itself becomes a courtroom. Sofas turn into witness stands. Lace curtains become blindfolds. Every gesture is evidence. You are always on trial, not for breaking the law, but for stepping even slightly outside a script everyone claims to know. Yet the irony is, the script keeps changing, and no one admits it. The same society that preaches purity sells lip balm named after Greek goddesses and novels that turn kisses into cliffhangers. Gentlemen lock drawers, not for ledgers, but for secret tins purchased behind discreet curtains. Shop girls slip folded pamphlets into their sleeves when no one's looking. Victorian life is a maze of trapdoors hidden beneath carpets of respectability. Lift one corner, and you find improvisation. Lift another, and you find desire disguised as commerce. Courtship itself becomes a slow, rehearsed dance around a fern. Yes, the fern matters. Victorians adored ferns with an almost comic intensity, as if nature itself had agreed to keep their secrets. You are offered seed cake and warmed without words, not to speak with your mouth full of feelings. A canary trills. Someone coughs. You count the beats between glances to make sure nothing looks like an invitation. If you succeed, your reward is the faintest trace of a smile, the kind that says, "We understand, but will never say." Here, privacy is virtue, and discretion a form of art. Curtains are drawn not only against the cold, but against the world. A rumor says some families even covered their piano legs to avoid suggestive thoughts. A charming myth that lingers because it feels true, even if it isn't. Euphemism becomes a language of its own. Shops sell personal necessities, which might mean hair oil or something far less mentionable. A gentleman asks for French goods with a polite cough. A lady chooses a sponge while pretending to admire ribbons. Everything is said without being said. Even the body must behave. Corsets train the spine like a schoolmistress of virtue. Deep breaths are rare, laughter a luxury. You move through rooms as if rehearsing for an invisible audience. Politeness becomes something physical, a discipline of the body as much as the mind. A gentleman's boots gleam so sharply they could catch the moon's reflection, while his collar scrapes like a reminder to hold his head high. Every garment enforces posture, every gesture rehearsed. Fashion, in this world, seems built not for comfort, but for control, a daily ritual of elegance and endurance. Yet behind the polished manners and gaslit calm, you can sense the contradiction simmering. The law censors what the market eagerly sells. The city grows darker and more alive as night falls. Curtains flicker, shadows move, and the world behind glass turns private again. A couple walks too close, then too far, and you realize that in this society, even space itself is a form of speech. And so begins our passage into a world that praises virtue with one hand and toys with temptation with the other, a society wrapped in lace and contradiction. Here, silence can shout louder than words, and modesty often conceals its own quiet rebellions. Every glance, every folded fan, every whispered phrase carries a double meaning. Welcome to the first shimmering glimpse of the Victorian paradox. Elegance masking desire, restraint concealing unrest. In that fragile, candlelit space, 1,000 tiny strategies bloom like pressed flowers between the pages of a diary. Chairs are arranged to create convenient blind spots. Mirrors are angled just enough to avoid reflections that might betray emotion. Even the sound of a closing door becomes a language. Never slammed, only clicked, both polite and conspiratorial. The dance of manners has many steps, and every gesture carries meaning. Humor, of course, is the saving grace. It slips between the cracks of propriety like sunlight through lace curtains. A joke about table legs relieves tension. A quip about the suggestive weather earns a scandalized gasp and a muffled laugh. You remind yourself to behave, and your reflection in the glass nods back solemnly, which counts as joke number 1. A few minutes later, you imagine the portrait of some long-dead ancestor turning discreetly away to grant privacy, joke number 2. When a gentleman drops his hat and you nearly applaud, that's joke number 3. Politeness may govern everything, but humor is what keeps everyone breathing. Still, beneath the wit and gloved composure, you feel the constant editing of words, gestures, even laughter. Every sentence is measured, trimmed of excess. You learn to laugh like rainfall on a conservatory roof, soft, restrained, never thunderous. You edit until your entire self becomes a study in subtext. Yet subtext, in a world like this, always threatens to become text once the doors close. This does not demand scandal. It demands kindness, the quiet recognition that everyone, even the most respectable, carries a hidden toolkit for the heart. Most of the tools are small: a sidelong glance, a lowered voice, a polite silence that says everything it must. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the wallpaper whisper, a debate humming through the plaster. Was the Victorian era truly as repressed as legend claims, or did it simply rehearse its passions in coded rooms? Historians still argue. Some say the stereotype of universal prudery is an exaggeration, a myth varnished by later generations. Others insist the repression was real, enforced by sermons, laws, and social ostracism. The truth, like a firm frond, curls delicately at the edges, revealing new patterns as it unfurls. You pull on your gloves and step back into the lamplight. A cab clatters past, its hooves striking cobblestones in steady rhythm, like a metronome marking the tempo of a very complicated waltz. You breathe the cool air and release a ribbon of fog that vanishes almost instantly, perhaps the best metaphor for Victorian propriety. It appears, it dissolves, and it reappears whenever one needs to justify decorum. Tucked in your hand is a small case of calling cards that snaps shut like a secret. The gloves smell faintly of lemon soap, and your hat sits at the angle prescribed by magazines that promise to safeguard reputations. The plan is simple. You leave your card at a door, and somewhere beyond that threshold, the future either yawns or blossoms. Courtship here is choreography on carpet. Your feet pause in the right places. Your voice lands softly, practiced to seem natural. Your eyes learn the delicate art of noticing without staring. Even the pull of a doorbell has meaning. 1 tug for formality, 2 for enthusiasm, 3 for disastrous boldness. When the door opens, you surrender your card. Its creamy surface bears your name in a modest serif, humble yet deliberate. The corners speak a private code. A folded edge means a personal delivery. The letters PPC, a polite farewell before leaving town. It is communication by gesture, semaphore rendered in ink and paper. You wait in a small chamber, scented faintly of beeswax and coal smoke, before being ushered into the parlor. The room feels like a stage set. Antimacassars spread like islands of snow over chairbacks, a fern drooping gracefully in its stand. Your hostess greets you, while a chaperone remains as quietly constant as wallpaper. The rule is visibility. Conversations must be audible, laughter modest, posture legible. When someone pours tea, you thank the heavens for the distraction. The cup becomes your shield. You speak of weather, of music, of the comfort of books, saying many things while revealing almost nothing. It is a miracle of civility, the art of communicating emotion through absence. Courtship among the Victorian middle class was a supervised ritual of chaperones, calling hours, and strict decorum. Romance bloomed in parlors and gardens under watchful eyes, while society papers chronicled each polite visit with the weight of whispered affection. That tension hums quietly each time a servant refreshes the tea. Music becomes a respectable pretext for lingering. The piano stands waiting, both accomplice and alibi. You are invited to play or to turn the pages, each role equally suggestive in its restraint. The music becomes conversation, disguised as melody. You listen closely, not for the notes, but for the way the fingers move. Skill suggests discipline. Discipline hints at character. No one says this aloud, but everyone knows it. Someone compliments the touch, and you murmur something about Mendelssohn, as if his name alone were a chaperone in a well-tailored suit. That, by the way, is joke number 1, for even the sternest composer becomes a useful guardian when romance hides behind the duet. The parlor test extends beyond music. Embroidery sits prominently displayed, a sampler on the wall declaring patience and precision. Books on the side table signal the household as moral compass, a travelogue beside a prayer book, a poetry collection carefully balanced with sermons. You sense that you are being examined as gently as a teacup checked for cracks. Each question tests the glaze. Do you read aloud well? Can you discuss a play without impropriety? Do you rise when an elder enters the room? These are not traps. They are the architecture that keeps hope standing upright in polite society. Printed advice floats behind every smile. Manuals on etiquette rescue hosts from awkward pauses. Household guides dictate everything, from proper visiting hours to the theoretical duties of a future nursery. You consult none of them directly, but they live in your gestures, invisible tutors in propriety. When the clock nears the appointed minute, you rise, not too fast, not too slow. Leaving gracefully is as crucial as arriving. The door closes softly behind you, and you exhale with the relief of one who has survived an examination, both silent and exhaustive. Outside, the post waits, that clever accomplice of romance. The humble penny stamp has turned the British Postal Service into Cupid's most discreet courier. Letters travel through narrow hallways and polished parlors, folded in perfect politeness, yet trembling with everything unsaid. Each word is chosen with surgical care, each sentence a balancing act between propriety and passion. Emotion hides behind etiquette, slipping out only in coded phrases or in the delicate gesture of a pressed flower. Rosemary for remembrance, ivy for fidelity, orange blossom for hope. Historians still argue over whether this so-called language of flowers truly shaped Victorian love or merely boosted stationery sales. But anyone who has ever slipped a violet among pansies knows the truth. A single petal can whisper what lips dare not say. Not all letters, however, are tender. Every February brings a darker bloom, the sharp wit of vinegar valentines. These printed insults, disguised as poems, arrive sealed and anonymous. They mock vanity, sting pride, and sometimes deliver heartbreak with rhyme and ink. A jilted suitor staring at his own caricature becomes a tragicomedy in miniature. Proof that even in the most mannered society, mischief always finds a loophole. Because that is the paradox. Even the most proper world permits rebellion, provided it's neatly folded, stamped properly, and delivered before tea. You straighten your cuffs, amused at the thought. Cupid, it seems, has always worked in the post office, smudging envelopes with ink and irony. Back in the parlor, a chaperone clears her throat, the polite bell signaling that the next act of the evening's ritual has begun. A walk in the garden. Moonlight spills over gravel paths, glinting on parasols and polished boots. Conversation moves like choreography, graceful, timed, and perfectly paced. Each glance holds the weight of a paragraph. Each silence, a confession deferred. The air hums with possibility, propriety intact, passion carefully disguised beneath lace and restraint. Even the family terrier, trotting dutifully beside you, seems to guard both virtue and gossip. Soon there will be dances, subscription balls, and quadrilles where affection masquerades as coordination. A misstep becomes comedy. A shared smile becomes understanding. And when the newspapers finally print their tidy announcements, names aligned like constellations of decorum, the city reads them with quiet delight, knowing that behind every engagement notice lies a history of laughter, glances, and letters sealed with care. Yet behind that orderliness lies quiet variation. Historians still debate whether every household truly obeyed the same rules of supervision. Some families allowed couples brief moments of privacy on verandas or carriage rides, while others ensured that a third person, often armed with knitting and patience, was never far away. The truth likely lies between extremes, as patchwork is the patterns on porcelain tea sets. Your final cup of tea cools on its saucer. Compliments are exchanged. A promise to return is placed gently upon the table, like a sugared cake. When you rise to leave, the butler hands you your cane with an expression that reveals nothing, which, of course, means he understands everything. The door closes behind you, and for a moment you feel lighter, taller, as though the ritual itself has lifted you. Your calling card remains indoors, resting on a silver tray among others. It waits, silent and rectangular, holding your name like a seed awaiting the right soil. Outside, your footsteps echo on the cobblestones, and the night air feels almost like applause. Days pass, and the next scene unfolds in a church where flowers crowd the aisles and the air hums with expectation. White dominates the palette, not for purity alone, but because Queen Victoria once wore it and the world followed. Now, with the advent of laundry bluing, white is practical as well as symbolic. The bride glides like snowfall, each step choreographed by centuries of instruction. Every gaze pretends to focus on sanctity, but half the congregation is quietly counting stitches in the veil. Orange blossoms crown her hair. Satin gloves soften her hands into symbols of grace and surrender. The ceremony gathers every rule into one fragile moment, so that a single steady yes can release them all at once. The vows are poised, measured, rehearsed. Civic law settles invisibly over the couple, though it clings more tightly to her. In marriage, her legal identity folds neatly into his, as though she were a letter sealed within his name. Property shifts to his signature. Her earnings, if any, vanish politely into his keeping. Reform will come later, but for now, the arrangement feels as natural as weather, constant, quiet, and politely unjust. The reception gleams with ritual sweetness. The towering bride cake, heavy with fruit and sugar, hides silver charms tied to ribbons. A thimble for diligence, an anchor for faith, a ring for love yet to come. Laughter sparkles. No one dares spill tea on satin. Someone tucks a slice of cake into an envelope to slip beneath a pillow, chasing dreams of a future spouse. The act is both foolish and tender, a reminder that even in a world ruled by restraint, hope remains the most elegant rebellion. The gifts arrive, teapots, linens, candlesticks, each one a coded wish for stability. A cousin presents a household manual promising to teach thrift, gentleness, and the art of not arguing about curtains. You nod like a scholar accepting a thesis. Night arrives with the quiet inevitability of routine. The newlyweds retire to a room where the fire ticks softly and the curtains hang like unspoken thoughts. In fashionable homes, twin beds or adjoining rooms are considered civilized. Privacy has become a marker of refinement. Less fortunate households, with thinner walls and fuller rooms, rely on courtesy rather than architecture. Either way, this night stands as much for duty as for affection. Medical authorities, almost exclusively men, insist that male desire is vigorous, while female modesty is natural. Dr. William Acton, writing with clinical calm, declares that most women are not much troubled by sexual feeling. His confidence feels less like truth than like weather, the steady drizzle of assumption falling upon generations. And there, beneath the flicker of lamplight and the rustle of satin, the paradox endures. The Victorian night, bound by matters and myth, hums with the tension between devotion and denial. Propriety remains the stage, but humanity, quiet, restless, imperfect, always finds its way between the lines. Some say those prudish stories were inventions of later gossip. Others swear a few discreet seamstresses truly sewed such garments by request. You trace the endless row of buttons and realize that, whether myth or fact, someone surely made money from the rumor. Even in solitude, the room feels crowded. Advice books murmur from memory, moderation, duty, the health of future children. Romance shrinks into arithmetic. Passion becomes a matter of timing. You picture some bureaucrat measuring affection by the minute hand, and the absurdity makes you almost laugh. Almost. Laughter feels risky, like cracking porcelain. A sip of sherry helps. A soft compliment helps more. Conjugal rights sounds like a legal clause misplaced in a love poem. Soon you learn that patience outlasts doctrine, and kindness is the truest etiquette. There's no manual for tenderness, only the discovery that silence often says enough. Beyond the door, a floorboard sighs. Maybe agreement, maybe warning. Privacy, you realize, is only an illusion. Footsteps, whispers, and the heartbeat of the city hum just beyond the wall. In small dwellings, even the night breathes communally. Carriages clatter, watchmen call the hour, and every whispered word must compete with London's restless heart. Respectable homes, if they can afford it, arrange sleeping rooms like chess pieces, 2 for rest, 1 for dressing, a design meant to preserve peace and appearances. But beneath such planning lies another calculation. Children cost money. Bread, coal, and rent all argue louder than affection. Rubber vulcanization, that industrial marvel, quietly introduces a new kind of prudence, the modern condom, sold discreetly under euphemistic labels. Sponges, syringes, and whispered tricks circulate through private conversation. No polite guide prints diagrams, yet knowledge passes hand to hand, like contraband wisdom. Economics soon takes a seat beside the marriage bed. A clerk's wage supports 2 children comfortably, 3 only with thrift, and 4 by miracle. Fertility patterns shift with aspiration. Middle-class families grow smaller, not only from morality, but from arithmetic. Historians still debate whether planning was deliberate or simply shaped by circumstance, but the outcome is visible in census tables. Fewer cradles rocking beside the fire. Mourning restores composure. The newlyweds sign guest books, smile at uncles, and discuss the weather as if the night were nothing more than a change in barometric pressure. The carriage waits. Someone misplaces the hat box, which, upon discovery, holds sandwiches, not hats. The mistake becomes an accidental love note disguised as lunch. Laughter returns, tender and private. The white dress soon folds into a wardrobe. The ring remains, a small gleam of contract that will learn to wash potatoes and sign letters. What never becomes ordinary is the quiet etiquette between 2 people. There is no manual for it. You invent the language together. How to say yes, how to say later, how to wrap affection around exhaustion. The night turns into a classroom where patience teaches fluency and gentleness revises every rule. Rumors outside tell of brides fainting, grooms drinking too boldly, and mothers-in-law performing lectures that last longer than operas. You choose calm instead. Open a window, breathe city air, and learn that courage, in this life, means softness combined with honesty. Respect, you find, comforts more deeply than lace. When the candle goes out, you promise yourself the kind of patience that endures leaky roofs, tight budgets, and a mattress that squeaks like a moral warning. Morning arrives with pamphlets stacked neatly beside the porridge bowl. Tracts, warning against a solitary sin so terrible it supposedly bends spines and clouds futures. The word masturbation appears only in Latin or euphemism, yet its echo fills sermons, school lectures, and medical treatises. Victorian medicine names it spermatoria and blames it for nearly everything: melancholy, madness, pallor, weak knees, forgetfulness, even bad arithmetic. Doctors issue cures with absolute confidence: cold baths for conscience, short hair to tame vanity, plain diets to subdue the imagination. The remedy for temptation, apparently, is chill water and boredom. When that fails, harsher methods appear in case notes: cautery, blistering, and cruel little devices meant to shock the body into obedience. You imagine patients submitting to moral surgery, trembling under the gaze of men who fear a nation of fainting accountants. Manufacturers sense profit in panic. Patent catalogs fill with contraptions: belts with tiny teeth, rings with clasps, gloves that tie to bedposts, tin shields for nocturnal security. Some inventors even propose bed alarms that ring if blankets move too freely. It would be comic if it weren't so sad. Schools join the crusade. Headmasters enforce morning plunges in icy water. Pupils wear mittens sewn to nightshirts to prevent improper contact. You stand beside a tin tub, teeth chattering, while someone declares that virtue wears wool in winter. The water feels less like ethics and more like punishment. The clergy echo the same fear. Sermons warn that selfish pleasure endangers civilization. Parish magazines print moral melodramas: fallen youths, tearful mothers, repentant cures, written with more typography than biology. Manuals for parents list symptoms of sin so broad they could incriminate anyone: restlessness, inattention, daydreams, ink blots shaped like nothing. Fathers receive advice to promote manly exercise and wholesome talk. The home becomes a theater of vigilance, where every creak at midnight sounds suspicious. You start to pity the staircase for being an informant. Even shops join the charade. On one shelf sit moral tracts condemning temptation. On the next, behind respectable soaps, rest the very items meant to prevent its consequences. A clerk, blushing, asks if you'd prefer the discreet brown paper or the extra discreet plain paper. His whisper is unnecessary. No one else is in the shop. Meanwhile, doctors collect evidence in ledgers. They write of fatigue cured by abstinence, anxiety relieved by marriage, and moral strength restored by prayer. Their language borrows from physics, as if virtue were a measurable current and sign a leak in the system. Modern historians still debate whether these patients improved, believed they improved, or simply felt comforted by being told they were not monsters. And so the Victorian world, in its hunger for order, builds an empire of restraint, where desire is pathologized, laughter is rationed, and privacy exists mostly on paper. Yet beneath the sermons and the cold baths, something stubbornly human persists, the quiet insistence that affection, curiosity, and hope cannot be legislated away. Beneath the velvet of respectability, the heart continues its small, steady rebellion, polite, patient, and alive. The conversation grows more intimate when medicine begins to speak of women. Doctors of the age describe female desire with the misplaced precision of moral poetry. Some call it a gentle river steady, containable, requiring only firm banks. Others declare it the root of hysteria, that endlessly elastic diagnosis stretched to catch every emotion the century could not name. Nerves become a net. Every deviation is labeled disorder. Midwives and matrons add their own prescriptions. Walk briskly at sunset. Eat plainly. Keep your hands busy. Sing a hymn before sleep. Beneath the calm advice lies unease, not fear of illness, but of bodies that resist tidy explanations. The panic reveals more about control than care. Printing presses were like anxious engines, releasing pocket-sized pamphlets that promise reform in 3 weeks if readers will simply follow the method. Shame, like steam, demands pipes. Print becomes its plumbing, carrying anxiety from parlors to classrooms and back again. Letters flood editors' desks, pleas for forgiveness written in trembling ink. Replies arrive solemnly, suggesting redemption comes by subscription, paid in guilt and self-discipline. Yet, in quieter corners, kindness endures. A teacher reminds a frightened pupil that her body is not a crime scene. A doctor replaces scolding with talk of rest and nourishment. A gentle spouse chooses patience over doctrine. True reform blooms in compassion, not correction. As the century softens, sermons give way to science. Sin turns into nervous strain, and physicians debate whether warnings merely tempt curiosity. The best advice remains simple. Eat well, sleep enough, think kindly of yourself. Still, the panic leaves traces locked doors, missing blankets, open windows in midwinter, as if cold air could guard virtue. Humor, at last, becomes medicine. The family cat, ever watchful, the only true chaperone. Anxiety about control always points to something larger: class, gender, and the invisible architecture of authority. The campaign against self-pleasure, so loudly advertised, reveals not just medical confusion, but the politics of who gets to define purity. Historians still argue whether the storm was as widespread as it sounds, or whether a handful of shrill voices frightened posterity into imagining an epidemic of shame. The record holds both thunder and drizzle pamphlets shriveling by candlelight, manuals ignored in drawers, and quiet moments of common sense reclaiming the room. By nightfall, the belts, straps, and mechanical devices once sold for protection look absurd, props from a moral farce. You bank the fire and think that tenderness, knowledge, and a pair of well-fitting pajamas do far more good than any instrument polished for secrecy. The room falls still. The mind steadies. Morning brings fewer slogans and more breakfast. You step into a clinic that smells faintly of carbolic acid and starch. The waiting room holds its breath like a choir about to hum. A small placard reads nervous complaints. Pale faces sit in quiet bravery as a clock ticks with bureaucratic certainty. The doctor arrives, polished manners, notebook ready. Hysteria, he begins, is a wandering storm of nerves. He lists its symptoms: palpitations, tears, sleeplessness, choking in the throat, fits of temper, and a melancholy so thick that sunlight itself feels like a scolding. You listen, half amused, as the definition expands to include half the population and nearly every mood on a rainy day. Beneath the flourish lies a mainstream truth. Victorian medicine used hysteria as a convenient label for countless ailments, most often applied to women, but not exclusively. Treatments promised to calm the nervous system with a mixture of science, faith, and theater. Hypnosis gains fashion among admirers of French neurologists. Electricity attracts gadget enthusiasts, promising to discipline disobedient nerves. Hydrotherapy, a favorite of the pious and practical alike, sends healing through temperature and pressure. The examination room feels oddly domestic. A fainting couch, a modest screen, a tray of oils, and peppermint-scented smelling salts for bravery. The physician, or sometimes a brisk assistant, asks the standard questions. Do you feel heaviness? Sudden tears? Racing thoughts? You answer with a crooked smile, describing your mind as a stable full of runaway ponies. The solution arrives as prescription, not empathy. Rest, cure, quiet rooms, warm milk, beef tea, no pens, no reading. When peace refuses to appear, electricity replaces silence. Pads press against your temples. Shocks ripple through your patience. And the attendant announces the temperature like a cheerful forecast until you realize you agreed to bathe in November. Then comes the most whispered of all treatments, manual therapy. It's described so delicately that the truth nearly vanishes beneath the language. Doctors speak of pelvic congestion, as if easing traffic in the body's lower districts. The goal, they insist, is to induce a therapeutic crisis, a polite term for what would now be called an orgasm believed to release tension and restore calm. Patients stare upward, counting ceiling patterns, while doctors make tidy notes that refuse to blush. Whether this practice was common remains uncertain. Some historians find traces in advertisements and case records. Others argue the evidence is fragile or colored by later imagination. The truth, as always, resists full illumination. Meanwhile, the century's fascination with machinery hums on. Inventors churn out spring hammers, percussion tools, and electric vibrators to treat female weakness and neuralgia. One early device looks like a tabletop engine, its vibrations sent through a flexible cord effective, perhaps, but so thunderous that neighbors knock on the wall to ask if you're repairing a piano. The story turns darker with Dr. Isaac Baker Brown, a London surgeon who, during the 1860s, promotes surgical removal of the clitoris as a cure for nervous disorders and moral lapses. His operations win temporary praise, then outrage. In 1867, his colleagues expel him for unethical conduct. His downfall stands as a grim monument to how easily the language of medicine can mask cruelty. And yet, in other rooms, gentler hands prevail. Steam rises. A nurse guides you into a cabinet bath with only your head exposed, and jets of warm water promise quiet balance. When she compliments your excellent circulation, you laugh and bow, accepting the imaginary award for most improved human radiator. By evening, the pamphlets still arrive, promising virtue by schedule and morality by method. You fold them neatly, drop them into the fire, and watch the paper curl. The flames consume the last of the century's nervousness, leaving behind a quieter conviction. Care heals more deeply than cure. Kindness outlasts fear, and laughter at last is medicine enough. Pamphlets promise calm through small obediences. Walks at sunrise, open windows in all seasons, diet so bland that flavor itself sounds like sign. They advise warm compresses for the stomach and a glass of stout for the faint-hearted. They warn against thrilling novels, late hours, and excessive feeling, in short, against being alive. You fold the paper neatly and use it to steady a wobbly table leg, improving both furniture and mood in one gesture. The talk of vibrators refuses to stay quiet. Electric companies advertise household devices for general health. Some physicians praise them for saving hands from fatigue and producing standardized results. Others insist they are purely for rheumatism, and that suggestive rumors are inventions of modern imagination. Historians still quarrel. Were medical vibrators really tools of muscle therapy? Or do we overread the past through a knowing grin? Humor and hindsight easily rewrite evidence. Real therapy often hides in the ordinary. A friend listens without diagnosing. A spouse learns that quiet companionship steadies heartbeats better than tonics. A midwife arrives with warm hands and a wiser, paperless education. Sleep becomes the rarest, most reliable medicine. Bedrooms rearrange for peace curtains soften noise. Clocks are covered to hush anxiety, and cats are welcomed because purring never fails a patient. Science, meanwhile, marches on. Laboratories multiply, and psychology peers over medicine's shoulder. Some doctors drop hysteria for neurasthenia, anxiety, or plain fatigue. Others cling to the old term, unwilling to lose its theatrical power. Diagnoses shift like weather. What seems firm one decade dissolves in the next. Still, the move from moral judgment to observation feels merciful. Even when treatments remain cold baths and supervised naps, conversation grows kinder. Women trade notes about doctors who listens, who lectures. Men admit that nervous collapse is not a female privilege, and that composure itself is exhausting. The best clinics adapt. Fewer speeches, softer chairs, gentler hours. Patients leave slightly more human than when they arrived. You step outside, shoulders lowered, steps lighter. The air feels wider, kinder. In a shop window, an electrical device hums like a bee trapped in a teapot, and you laugh. Joke number 3. Someday, smaller gadgets sleek, battery-powered will be sold for shoulder tension, and everyone will nod solemnly. The body, you think, has always outwitted its instructions. You wander into Holywell Street, Booksellers' Row, where shopfronts lean like gossiping neighbors. Sermons fill the windows, but behind velvet curtains lies another inventory. A whiskered proprietor invites polite browsing, eyes hinting at hidden catalogs. You never ask directly, just murmur about French novels or medical treatises, and the ritual begins. A bell rings, a door opens, and you are led down a corridor smelling of paste and secrets. The clerk offers a parcel wrapped in music paper and says, "It is Schubert." He does not say which Schubert. Joke number 1. Even the composer might blush to be quoted in this fashion. In 1857, Parliament passed the Obscene Publications Act, granting magistrates power to seize immoral material. 11 years later, the Hicklin test defined obscenity by whether a single passage might corrupt the vulnerable, a phrase elastic enough to fit nearly anything. Booksellers adapted like smugglers. Dangerous texts hidden under safe covers, 2 ledgers kept, one for taxes, one for truth. Illustrations traveled faster than words. A drawer might hold classical scenes innocent from afar, indecent up close. Another offered cartes de visite and stereoscope cards that revealed depth and raised eyebrows. Other works catered to the city's fascination with flagellation, disguised under titles like corrective experiences, which stretched the word corrective beyond recognition. The trade thrived on code. Ask for sculpture studies, receive animated statues. Request a Latin primer, and an entirely different lesson appears. Some sellers rebound daring works inside old sermons or law digests, so police raids uncovered nothing but pious texts. The image of a constable proudly confiscating contracts while vice hides inside its covers became a local joke and a common reality. Shopkeepers developed sharp instincts. Bells rang twice for strangers, thrice for friends. Ledgers held only initials. Addresses read, "Near the square with railings and a tree." Holywell Street wasn't unique, but its concentration of cunning made it legendary. You browse translations of Boccaccio or Roman tales rewritten in heavy Victorian prose moral on the surface, meticulous in sin beneath. Joke number 2. The gentleman who buys a tract denouncing vice, then wraps it carefully in brown paper to protect his virtue. Prices mirrored risk clean copies costly, blurred ones cheap. Crates labeled household goods clinked suspiciously at the docks, proof that art, commerce, and appetite shared the same shelf. Imports feed the fog. French postcards circulate like candy. German albums arrive disguised as sewing machine catalogs. The border between education and titillation dissolves in the mist. And fog is exactly the weather Holywell Street thrives in. Scandals erupt periodically. A clergyman's nephew discovered with a parcel of illustrations. A magistrate determined to make an example. Moral campaigners rail against the corruption of errand boys. Editors warn that national virtue depends on the purity of print. Yet the numbers tell another story. Curiosity renews itself faster than censorship can smother it. Historians still debate the clientele. Were they libertines collecting trophies, lonely clerks seeking escape, couples comparing notes, or simply readers testing the boundary of propriety? Records refuse tidy graphs. Guilty diaries burn easily. Court documents magnify extremes. What remains are rumors, fragments, and the persistent truth that desire and curiosity share a stubborn resistance to rules. In backrooms and attics, photographers debate decency through their lenses. Some call their work artistic studies for painters. Others lock doors and count coins. Paper thickness matters, ink richness too. Newcomers see mild allegories. Regulars receive plain wrappers hiding bolder scenes. Outside, crusaders preach that purity can be printed into being, while Holywell Street hums on presses, beating like hidden hearts, turning repression into enterprise. Between moralists and merchants lingers the same old comedy. Desire forever disguising itself, forever thriving beneath its own denials. You leave the lane as the wind stirs the hanging signs. Somewhere, another bell rings, another parcel changes hands. You think of the clinic, the pamphlets, the humming machines, and realize the same current runs through them all, the attempt to regulate feeling. And yet, in every act of laughter, secrecy, or tenderness, the body keeps its quiet victory steady, unprintable, and alive. A headmaster sues a bookseller for corrupting youth, but embarrasses himself by admitting he studied the evidence a little too well. A novel once dismissed as frivolous becomes scandalous the moment a politician condemns it in Parliament. Under the Hickland test, prosecutors pluck single paragraphs from context, waving them in court like moral specimens. A satirical essay or scholarly study can be reduced to one spicy raisin that supposedly defines the entire pudding. Yet not all booksellers are villains. Many act like any careful tradesman paying fair wages, refusing sales to minors, even asking customers to read the first page before purchase. Others rely on lawyers rather than ethics. Holywell Street's reputation bruises easily, fed by cartoons of sly merchants and furtive buyers. You leave your discreet parcel wrapped in a newspaper announcing the price of coal. The street resumes its rhythm clop, chatter, and the double ting of the shop bell. You walk carefully, as though a stumble might spill contraband Greek myths onto the cobblestones and summon a brigade of moral policemen. The parcel is light. Paper always weighs less than guilt. Laws have names, judges have tests, sellers have disguises, and readers keep the same restless hearts that ache for stories forbidden by authority. That tension is the engine of curiosity, the pulse that keeps doorbells ringing. Beyond the market, a different theater unfolds a grand townhouse, glowing with beeswax and brass. A servant opens the door before you knock twice. Inside, every footstep belongs to the choreography of class. Bells summon, trays glide, voices soften upstairs and harden below. From the street, the house radiates calm, but within it, each corridor hums with quiet transactions of duty and desire. The air of respectability begins at dawn. Bells on a servant's board jingle like nervous insects, calling names in random sequence. In the kitchen, steam blurs faces. The cook scolds. The butler inspects silver like a banker reviewing ledgers. The housekeeper moves with the gravity of a magistrate, balancing inventory and temper. Rules smooth the machinery of gentility, but the machinery is human, and humans notice each other. On narrow stairs, hands brush, eyes linger. Every act of courtesy risks becoming an invitation. Bedrooms stack like a diagram of moral rank. Master's suite in front, mistress's room draped in embroidered restraint, attic chambers smelling of starch and loneliness. Privacy is rationed. Keyholes have their legends, hinges their own verdicts. A single whisper in the night can change a livelihood by morning. Servants made up more than 1/10 of Victorian Britain's population. In many homes, they outnumbered the family they served. Their labor sustained comfort. Their silence preserved reputations. Diaries from maids and footmen reveal how fragile that silence was. They saw everything, the habits, the tempers, the late-night footsteps, and wrote it down later, sometimes in code, sometimes with wit. At dinner parties, the butler times each course with clock-like precision, while guests debate the moral improvement of the poor. Irony wafts across the table with the scent of roast beef. The same household that funds chastity lectures employs a parlor maid expected to look perpetually young and graceful. Downstairs, laughter flows freer. The kitchen becomes its own republic of rumor. A cook tells of a nobleman's son who married a dairymaid in secret. The ending changes each retelling, but always involves a sigh. Humor, sharper than law, protects the powerless. It lets the mind dance even while hands scrub. Power breeds curiosity. A mistress may rely on her maid's discretion about corsets or melancholy. A gentleman may find excuses to inspect the laundry for misplaced gloves. Whether such encounters were rare or routine, dismissal letters citing moral reasons suggest they were frequent enough to haunt household records. The same homes that preached purity quietly rehired fallen girls under new names when labor was scarce. Attic rooms still hold traces, forgotten ribbons, hairbrushes, folded notes, ghosts of stories never entered into ledgers. Housekeepers, meanwhile, kept secret codes. Beside a servant's name, a discreet mark meant pregnancy or trouble. The note followed her from job to job, a scar written in ink. Within the hierarchy of service, divisions ran deep. The lady as maid draped in hand-me-down silk considered herself superior to the soot-covered scullery maid. Rivalries simmered, yet alliances formed too. Maids swapped confidences to protect each other. Butlers shielded employers' reputations in exchange for security. The contract language was polite deceit. Good conduct expected meant silent obedience. Character required meant a spotless moral certificate. A whisper could erase a career. Some households prided themselves on benevolence, a small gift at Christmas, a kind tone mistaken for justice. Gratitude was expected to echo louder than fairness. Still, tenderness occasionally crossed the lines of rank. A nursemaid who raised generations, a coachman trusted with children's first rides, a cook whose Sunday roast won praise from every guest, these figures became family legends, yet always conditional. One scandal or illness could end the story overnight. The ledger forgave nothing. Industrialization pulled new faces into these houses, young women from villages seeking steady wages. They found long hours, steep costs for uniforms, and rules thicker than a Bible. One made jokes that at least Scripture includes miracles. Another finds defiance in music. When the upstairs piano plays a waltz, two maids twirl briefly in the kitchen, laughing until the butler's step freezes the air. He says nothing. He doesn't need to. The song ends itself. In the scullery that evening, firelight wavers across tin pots and weary faces. The warmth feels temporary, borrowed from labor itself. Above, the family reads aloud from moral essays about purity and duty. Below, hands knead dough and tell jokes about both. Between floors lies the real empire, the one built on silence, glances, and endurance. Every polished surface conceals a network of bargains. Reputation for obedience, shelter for discretion, affection for invisibility. The household's order depends on pretending that temptation and fatigue do not exist. Yet the servant's laughter, the shared crumb of defiance, reveals a subtler truth. The moral code of the Victorian home runs on secrets just as surely as on candles and coal. Outside, London exhales steam through its grates. Somewhere, a shop bell rings twice. Upstairs, a drawing-room clock ticks politely toward midnight. Below, a kitchen whisper turns into a quiet laugh that no one will ever record, but that says everything about survival. A rumor circulates through servants' halls that a wealthy man once married his maid in secret. True or not, the story warms cold nights. It promises that love might jump class lines, though reality keeps them nailed tight. Historians debate whether such unions were rebellion or convenience, but the feeling matters more. The dream of being seen beyond apron and rank. At night, the great houses of London sleep in layers, silk canopies above, thin blankets below. The servants' dreams drift between duty and impossible tenderness. If every secret in one house were written down, its library would collapse under the weight. Dawn comes with bells, and the machinery of order starts again, polished, punctual, pretending. Outside, the fog welcomes another theater, London's streets after dark. Gaslight paints halos on wet stone. Voices shift between laughter and bargaining. A woman adjusts her hat beneath a lamp, calm, practiced, alive. Her profession runs on courage, charm, and endurance. This nighttime economy has its own hierarchy. Streetwalkers pacing by bridges, parlor girls renting small rooms, theater door girls waiting near stage exits, and courtesans who dine with peers of the realm. Their slang, wit, and etiquette rival any drawing rooms. By mid-century, tens of thousands of women in London earn some income through sex work, a number reformers called both moral ruin and economic fact. Poverty, widowhood, and starvation pressed many into the trade. A maid's monthly wage could equal a single client's night. Respectability was costly. Survival, immediate. In Haymarket, music spills from taverns, while chestnut vendors shout beside watchful policemen. So long as noise stays polite and scandal discreet, the arrangement holds. In back alleys, women share rooms and stories. How to spot danger, stretch rent, or cure illness. Disease stalks them quietly, creeping through every class though blame falls on one. Under new contagious diseases regulations, women suspected of prostitution can be detained and examined by force. Refusal means arrest. Compliance means humiliation. Survival here is both labor and performance. Not all clients seek the body alone. Some want conversation or illusion, a softer form of need. The most successful courtesans read newspapers, memorize poetry, and manage finances like merchants. Their diaries record rent ledgers beside notes on affection. One famously sent Christmas gifts to orphanages signed, "From a woman once scolded for less charity." Scandal sells faster than sermons. Historians still argue whether sex work was coercion or adaptation, sin or survival. In truth, it was all of them. Some madams were predators, others fiercely protective. Some girls were tricked, others calculating. The fog dissolves categories. Judgment feels absurd in a city that profits from both desire and denial. Street codes evolve like dialects. A dropped match signals police nearby. A double whistle calls for help. Small alliances form between women who guard each other's corners. Inside lodging houses, they share tea and jokes before sleep, laughter sharp as armor. One woman quips that hymns in reform homes were harder work than nights on the street. Another dreams of Australia, where a new name might outlive old shame. Moral reformers publish pamphlets, while readers crave what they condemn. Painters call erotic scenes studies in realism. Novelists issue warnings rich in forbidden detail. Gentlemen collect them and claim accident. Respectability feeds on what it forbids, a market of hypocrisy more enduring than any trade. Among the workers themselves, affection survives in fragile forms. A woman splits breakfast with a soldier, no illusions between them. Another saves coins for her child, hidden with relatives. Some find partners who stay, not out of virtue, but recognition. These brief tendernesses prove the humanity official reports ignore. Empathy becomes a profession, reading moods, managing danger, surviving with grace. When dawn seeps through chimney mist, the city reshuffles its cast. Market carts roll into Covent Garden. Night workers fade into flower sellers. The boundary between sinner and servant evaporates with the fog. London's economy of virtue depends on invisible labor, domestic, sexual, emotional. Without it, parlors would chill and sermons would lose their contrast. As sunlight climbs over rooftops, the paradox glows plain. A city that preaches chastity thrives on industries of pleasure. Laws punish the visible while fortunes rise from the hidden. Yet in that contradiction, life persists, clever, unashamed, unextinguished. Near the market, a baker pulls warm rolls from the oven and grins. Yeast, he says, is the honest perfume of dawn. A woman beside him laughs, replying that she prefers it to any rosewater from Mayfair. For a fleeting moment, laughter softens the city's edges, and London seems to forgive itself for all its contradictions. Down the street, another procession begins. Women in worn dresses carry pamphlets like banners. Their faces are pale from sleeplessness, but bright with resolve. The air smells of rain and horses, yet they move as if through incense. Their leaflets read, "Repeal the contagious diseases acts." The words are polite, but burn like acid. These laws let police detain any woman suspected of vice near ports or barracks. Doctors may order invasive examinations. Refusal means prison. Their campaign is not only against policy, but against the presumption that women's bodies exist for inspection. They march without banners, yet their footsteps strike like a drum against the cobblestones, steady and undeniable. Each echo says what words cannot. To be seen is not to be shamed. Their silence carries more conviction than 1,000 speeches. Behind them, London stirs bells ring from chapels, preaching virtue. Tea shops hung with gossip disguised as concern, and in a narrow room above a quiet street, a reformer dips his pen in moral ink, drafting yet another treatise on purity. Outside, the air smells of rain and defiance. The city watches, uncertain whether to admire or condemn, as these women write their own chapter in the long argument between judgment and justice. In the damp gray of morning, defiance and necessity walk side by side. The city exhales its breath, a mix of smoke, bread, and weary hope. Between the glow of gas lamps and the clang of shop shutters, London reveals its pulse, untidy, unrepentant, alive. Law and laughter meet in narrow streets where survival wears no mask of virtue. Each step echoes the secret rhythm of countless lives, maids, and merchants, dreamers and the damned, all bound by the same hunger to endure. Here, beneath fog and sermon, the city's heart beats uncomplicated, imperfect, and achingly human. In 1860s Britain, laws meant to protect public health become instruments of control. The Contagious Diseases Acts empower officers to inspect and confine women suspected of prostitution, while the men they serve remain untouched. The result is humiliation masquerading as hygiene. In garrison towns, women vanish overnight, fleeing the shame of forced medical examinations. The phrase public health hides a hierarchy older than any statute. On a London street corner, a young protester hands out leaflets. Her gloves are frayed, her hat askew, but her voice does not waver. When a passerby mocks her, she replies softly and wins the silence. Around her, policemen cough behind mustaches, pretending not to hear. The leaflet she gives you details the examinations in cold, bureaucratic prose. You imagine the terror of being told to undress before strangers. Joke number 1 arrives bitterly. It seems being violated is acceptable, but objecting is unladylike. In drawing rooms turned war rooms, reformers gather under the calm portrait of Josephine Butler, whose eyes seem to follow every doubt. A clergyman's wife, she writes letters to Parliament, lectures in halls where women rarely speak, and endures slander branding her as hysterical or sinful. She answers it all with reason and patience. No law can purify society by dirty injustice, she writes. By candlelight, volunteers fold petitions and count signatures. Printers labor through the night so that even laundresses can afford a copy. The smell of ink becomes the scent of rebellion. A small triumph hides in a clever trick. Activists disguise. Pamphlets as song sheets near music halls, letting protest travel with melody. Critics sneer in newspapers, mocking the repeal movement as sentimental or dangerous. Yet every insult becomes advertisement. Curiosity spreads faster than approval. Policemen question orders. Doctors argue ethics in clubs and at breakfast tables. Families whisper the words Contagious Diseases Acts for the first time. Silence begins to crumble. In one military town, a hospital known as the Lock sits behind high brick walls. At dawn, women queue for release, some cured, some scarred, some hollow-eyed. The matron checks names as if balancing debts. Inside, iron beds line whitewashed walls. Patients hum music hall songs, trading rude lyrics for lullabies. Defiance becomes prayer. Joke number 2 surfaces when a girl claims the broth must be brewed from boots. It smells of despair and shoe polish. Reformers visiting these hospitals record stories no report can sanitize. Women detained by mistake. Others left with lifelong injuries from unnecessary procedures. Their testimonies fill pamphlets that chip away at Parliament's stone indifference. By winter, rallies overflow. Male allies rise to speak. Timidly at first, then with conviction. Some quote scripture, others statistics. Soldiers write letters to newspapers, declaring that the laws disgrace them more than disease ever could. Gradually, the debate shifts. It is no longer about health, but rights. The right to dignity, to one's own body, to justice without humiliation. The word equality edges into polite conversation. Disagreements remain. Some reformers call for total abolition of vice laws, others for education and fair work for women. But disagreement is progress. Respectable women now travel alone, debate politicians, and speak from podiums. Courage spreads like contagion, this time for good. Police harassment does not vanish, but cracks appear in authority. Some constables quietly warn women of raids. Others refuse orders. In one celebrated trial, a group of accused women stand together and demand the magistrate read the law aloud. Their laughter at the verdict ripples through the newspapers and into legend. Years pass. Petitions pile up like monuments. At last, Parliament bends. The most brutal clauses of the acts are repealed, piece by piece. The victory is imperfect, yet profound. The principle that the state cannot violate women in the name of virtue takes root. a seed that will outlive its planters. Many still face poverty, but the idea that the body deserves legal respect becomes part of Britain's conscience. Josephine Butler keeps speaking, turning reform into vocation. At one twilight meeting, she tells a weary crowd, "Moral reform cannot punish the weak for the sins of the strong." Her words float through open windows, landing softly on the street outside, where the ghosts of the silenced seem to listen. Someone jokes, the Prime Minister must dream of pamphlets sprouting like mushrooms after rain. Laughter rises, tired but free. The city resumes its noise. Carriages rattle over wet stones. Posters announce lectures about liberty and health. The pavements glisten like mirrors, and in them you glimpse a nation beginning to see itself clearly. The reflection is flawed, but awakening. Decency built on fear is not decency at all. You pocket a spare leaflet and walk into the lamplight of 1885. The air buzzes with scandal. Newspapers crackle in gloved hands. Vendors shout headlines too lurid for breakfast tables. The talk of the city is the maiden tribute of modern Babylon. Journalist W.T. Stead has exposed child prostitution in London's underworld, claiming that a young girl can be bought like furniture. To prove it, he arranges the purchase of a 13-year-old through intermediaries, rescuing her afterward, but shocking the public beyond measure. The story erupts across Britain, shaking parlors and pulpits alike. Printing presses thunder through the night, pages fluttering like startled birds. Everywhere, whispers bloom faster than ink can dry. A vicar, drafting his sermon against the scandal, admits he must read it twice to condemn it well. Joke number 3, and sails soar by dawn. Respectability, ever ravenous, consumes the sin it claims to scorn. Historians still debate Stead's motives. Heroism or exploitation? His method may have been theatrical, but it worked. Public outrage forces Parliament's hand. Within months, the age of consent rises from 13 to 16, a reform long stalled by indifference now propelled by shock. The uproar that began in shame ends in protection, imperfect, but real. As the presses fall silent and night folds over the city, London exhales a changed breath. The same fog that once concealed injustice now hums with voices that refuse to fade. Between the echoes of law and laughter, fear and ink, something tender begins. A conscience newly lit, trembling yet steadfast, unmistakably human. Reformers had long urged Parliament to raise the age of consent from 13 to 16, arguing that poverty and ignorance left girls defenseless. Legislators hesitated, claiming modesty forbade open debate. Then W.T. Stead's maiden tribute of modern Babylon shattered the silence with the delicacy of artillery. Within weeks, petitions flooded Westminster. The Criminal Law Amendment Act passed swiftly, lifting the age to 16 propelled by outrage that trembled. Between morality and spectacle. London reacted with contradictions. Some hailed Stead as a crusader. Others branded him a manipulator who exploited the very innocence he claimed to save. The authorities, never fond of journalists who proved too effective, prosecuted him for abduction, despite his protest of moral purpose. Convicted and imprisoned for 3 months, Stead entered history as both saint and showman, the first modern tabloid martyr. Crowds that once cheered now debated his ethics over pints of bitter, while posters displayed his face halfway between halo and headline. Reform marches filled the streets. Banners stitched by laundresses and clerks read "Protect the Children." Middle-class women joined artisans and shopkeepers, united by outrage. Speakers compared the trade in innocence to war. Pamphlets quoted Stead's lurid descriptions of bribed policemen and locked rooms. Even skeptics remembered them as truth. Booksellers capitalized, selling copies at inflated prices for charity. When asked which charity, they smiled and said, "Ours." The trial became pure theater. Crowds thronged the court as reporters dueled in metaphor. One cast Stead as a knight slaying vice, another as a meddler mistaking shock for salvation. The weary judge seemed to sentence journalism itself. Marching to prison, Stead looked almost serene, while his printer's boy sold souvenir sheets, shouting, "Fresh edition, same scandal." Beneath the spectacle, quiet consequences unfolded. Police raids on brothels increased. Charitable refuges opened for girls fleeing poverty. Newspapers, having discovered profit in moral indignation, began producing reform stories at industrial scale. The public, once shocked, now expected drama from every cause. Justice blurred with entertainment until neither could stand without applause. Behind the noise lay smaller truths. Some women who had fought the contagious disease's axe grew uneasy, watching a new crusade again speak of women's bodies without women's consent. They wrote letters insisting that protection must not mean surveillance. Parliament filed them politely, then returned to louder headlines. Historians still debate whether Stead's campaign improved safety or merely drove exploitation deeper underground. The number of missing girls remained uncertain. Shame still did its silencing work. From his cell, Stead wrote ornate defenses invoking divine duty and the press's moral obligation to awaken the nation's conscience. His admirers quoted him in Sunday meetings. His critics noted that his rescue relied on deceit. The irony left fingerprints. Every reformer becomes someone else's scandal. Theaters and novelists seized the theme. Melodramas staged fallen maidens, rescued at curtain's end. Audiences wept, then flirted under gaslight. Printers issued penny novels of identical plot. Moral panic turned lucrative. Indignation became a business model. In ticket booths, humor survived. Ladies, please do not faint before Act 3. Beyond London, purity leagues spread. Towns formed vigilance committees. Teachers warned pupils about strangers. Parents clutched children tighter. Yet in quieter corners, social workers spoke of wages, housing, and education as the true defenses against exploitation. Their voices were smaller, but lasted longer. Laws could change overnight. Conditions took generations. They planned training schools and shelters, envisioning dignity without spectacle. The labor of decency, unlike scandal, drew no headlines. By year's end, London had grown used to words that once turned cheeks crimson. Parliament congratulated itself. Newspapers sought fresh sensations. Still, something lingered, a recognition that ink could move nations faster than sermons. And that outrage, once awakened, demanded constant feeding. The maiden tribute became legend, part cautionary tale, part myth of moral awakening. At a newsstand, a faded copy fluttered in the wind, its ink dim but its power intact. Virtue shouted too loudly, it seemed, began to sound like hunger. A few streets away, a discreet shop glowed between a tobacconist and a milliner. The sign read French marital goods. To passers-by, it resembled a perfumery. Yet the blush on the shopkeeper's cheeks told another story. Shelves bore bottles labeled for medical use. Behind the counter, a locked glass case gleamed, the quiet heart of the rubber revolution. Inside, vulcanized rubber had rewritten privacy. Since Charles Goodyear's discovery in the 1840s, latex could flex and endure. Contraceptives, once made from linen or animal membranes, crude, awkward, and brittle, were now thin, washable, and reusable. You lift one from its paper wrap, light as breath, the color of candle smoke dot. By the mid-19th century, rubber manufacturing enabled mass production of contraceptives in Europe and America. Sold quietly in barbershops, chemists, and discreet rooms like this, they traveled farther than any sermon on chastity. Language contorted to keep the commerce respectable. Clerks offered preventive sheaths for physicians' demonstrations, or hygienic sponges and marriage aids for honeymooning couples. Behind such euphemisms, pulsed a steady anxiety about decency. Advertisements appeared in coded prose promising marital happiness or confidence for gentlemen. The phrases read like poetry for the embarrassed. You could almost see a nervous customer pretending to browse soaps before whispering, perhaps, one of those French umbrellas. Joke number 1. Alive and well. Economic need fueled the trade. Working-class families faced rent devouring half their wages. Middle-class households chased respectability measured by servants, not children. Limiting births became as much survival as morality. Pamphlets circulated claiming prudence was patriotic. The Malthusian League lectured that family planning could prevent starvation. Resistance rose from pulpits and parliament alike. Preachers thundered that self-control, not devices, should govern virtue. Women, exhausted by restraint already practiced in poverty, sighed quietly. One legal curiosity survives from 1877. Reformers Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh published The Fruits of Philosophy, a medical pamphlet explaining contraception in plain English. For this, they were prosecuted for obscenity, echoing Stead's own paradox. Amid sermons, scandals, and shopfront secrets, a quieter revolution matured. The tools of control, once moral or legal, became material, tangible, and purchasable. Between ink and rubber, outrage and discretion, Victorian Britain learned its most modern lesson, that virtue itself could be mass-produced. The obscenity trial of Annie Besant and Charles Bradlaugh drew crowds, hungry for spectacle, morality and science wrestling over a printer's proof. Both were convicted, though a technicality overturned the verdict later. Ironically, the scandal made The Fruits of Philosophy a bestseller. Curiosity, it seemed, always outran censorship. Shopkeepers reprinted the pamphlet until even grocers recognized the title. Manufacturers adapted swiftly, hiding behind medical pretenses. Syringes for feminine hygiene gleamed in shop windows, half tool, half ornament. Others sold pessaries shaped like rings or domes, their terminology deliberately confusing, cloaked in clinical language. Historians still debate whether buyers sought contraception or simply relief from vague ailments labeled weakness. The ambiguity protected both sides, the seller claiming medical purpose, the buyer claiming discomfort. Truth sat quietly between them. Chemists balanced law and demand with grace born of practice. A nod, a note, and the right coin unlocked the hidden drawer. Some rang a small bell to signal privacy. When the customer left, the shop's rhythm returned. Cough syrup, liniment, hair tonic. One proprietor printed a false inventory listing only soap and salts for inspectors. The real stock tucked behind tins of mustard powder. Bureaucracy never stood a chance against ingenuity. And so, joke number 2, the human instinct to sidestep prohibition, sparkled again. Moralists warned that contraception would destroy civilization, breeding vice and decay. Yet the opposite bloomed quietly. Divorce was rare. Couples planned families with calm precision. Women's letters spoke of relief masked as health. Behind lace curtains, love shed its fear. On the city's edge, factories made rubber goods beside bicycle tires, sulfur scenting the air. Boxes labeled French imports hid quiet rebellion. Plain parcels traveled by post, each. Discreet delivery a small act of emancipation. Clergy and politicians staged crusades against artificial prevention. Pamphlets condemned those who placed comfort above duty. But reality refused retreat. Census numbers told the story. Families shrinking, nurseries turned to storage rooms, diaries speaking of relief as moral as any prayer. Historians still debate whether the late Victorian fertility decline stemmed from devices, delayed marriage, or abstinence. Yet in the homes themselves, power had shifted from pulpit to household. In a crowded lecture hall, Bradlaugh spoke on free thought, while Besant defended the right to understand one's own body. Midwives, skeptics, and students filled the benches. A police officer lingered in the doorway, notebook ready. Their words blended ethics and biology, science and rebellion. When applause broke out, it spilled into the street, mixing with the clang of tram bells. The city seemed larger that night, stretched by the simple audacity of public discussion. At closing time, the clerk from the discreet shop locked his shutters, counted the coins, and tucked unsold parcels beneath the counter. Progress hummed softly behind drawn curtains. In a nearby tenement, a young couple opened a small packet marked "Imported French Goods" and smiled, guiltless for once. Joke number 3 arrived quietly. Rubber, the same material protecting raincoats and telegraph wires, had become the substance of freedom. It squeaked faintly when stretched, an accidental anthem of the modern age. Outside, a lamplighter passed, oblivious that his flame illuminated a new kind of privacy. The shop's air smelled of paper, soap, and revolution. Change had not come in thunder, but in texture, pliant, resilient, like rubber itself. In a cramped parlor nearby, a couple sat over a ledger and a single candle. Rent on Monday, bread on Tuesday, coal on Thursday. Their lives were mathematics. Each new baby threatened to unbalance the sum. Fertility, once fortune, now felt like a storm measured with broken tools. The industrial city thrummed outside, smoke climbing, whistles dividing the day. Men earned wages that vanished by Saturday. Women stitched until their backs ached. Children ran errands for pennies. In such rooms, sentiment shared space with survival. By the late 19th century, Britain's birth rate had begun its long fall from roughly 35 births per thousand to under 30 within a generation. Politicians called it unnatural. Families called it mercy. Pamphlets preached a new arithmetic. The Malthusian League urged prudence. Plan your family as carefully as your budget. Some nodded in agreement, others because they already lived that truth in secret. Even the police, lurking at lecture doors, seemed unsure whether such talks counted as education or indecency. Sometimes, humor softened the tension. During one lecture on restraint, a speaker dropped his chalk mid-sentence, and someone from the back called, "Good demonstration, sir." Joke number 1, reborn. In better homes, the same debate wore finer clothes. Respectable journals published essays praising well-spaced families. Doctors spoke of therapeutic regulation. The language tiptoed around the truth until it nearly vanished. A wife described as delicate meant exhausted. A husband praised for discipline was one who could afford patience and thick curtains. Historians argue whether this new restraint grew from morality, medicine, or simple fatigue. Whatever the cause, it reshaped intimacy. In factories, women spoke more plainly. They joked about counting babies like pay packets. Recipes for herbal contraceptives passed between workbenches. Pennyroyal tea, vinegar sponges, whispered prayers. Unreliable, yes, but preferable to hunger. Knowledge traveled faster than wages. Investigators noted that factory girls sent coded notes about their cycles. Scraps of fabric tucked in sewing baskets, ribbons of quiet rebellion. Economists noticed first. Smaller families saved more, ate better, educated longer. Employers complained of rising expectations. Preachers fretted that prosperity weakened faith. Shopkeepers smiled. Fewer mouths meant more coins for cocoa and gramophones. The arithmetic of morality now balanced on comfort. One sermon scolded selfish couples. Another praised domestic virtue. The contradiction became a national pastime. Debates about women's roles filled parlors and parliament alike. Reformers declared motherhood a choice, not destiny. Opponents warned that nature, once defied, would take revenge. Medical journals published contradictions. one blaming factory work for infertility, another blaming education. Few considered that women might simply prefer smaller families. By century's end, the great moral crusades had quieted into daily habit. Privacy had gained substance, control had shifted hands, and progress, flexible, unadvertised, and faintly scented of sulfur, had taken root. The quiet revolution was already complete, humming in drawers, behind curtains, and in the gentle, calculated pauses between one generation and the next. Public moralists thundered that birth control defied divine order, though one nurse quipped that even divinity might welcome a quiet house. The movement advanced behind euphemisms, pamphlets on marital prudence, clinics named hygiene societies, doctors daring to answer forbidden questions. Some refused fees, calling ignorance more dangerous than sin. Others charged modestly and were accused of trading in vice. The same sheath or leaflet could mean salvation or scandal. Soon census records showed smaller households and fewer infant graves. Midwives noted healthier mothers, steadier recoveries. Working-class women, once mocked as perpetually pregnant, learned to govern their own rhythms. Historians debate whether this was feminism's true birth, but for those living it, it felt like quiet dignity. Each pause a small act of faith in tomorrow, in a repurposed schoolroom. A woman in a plain dress lectured on thrift and cleanliness. Rain rattled the windows as she said, "Poverty is not virtue. Parents should raise children they can feed and teach, not merely count." The audience nodded gravely. A few men blushed at her candor. Afterward, she took whispered questions, sketching answers on scraps of paper. The humility of the room made each exchange sacred. Outside, children recited lessons under a lamppost, coats patched, eyes bright. Symbols of the city learning to plan. London began to hum with a new ambition. More wages went to books instead of bread. Mothers walked straighter, no longer bowed by endless pregnancies. Newspapers mocked reformers as accountants of the heart, but joy returned to homes that could now afford both laughter and rest. "We finally bought a canary," said one dock worker, "since the cradle stays empty." The bird sang too loudly, he joked, a reminder that quiet happiness never lasts long. Still, behind countless doors, families rewrote destiny, one deliberate pause at a time. Choice multiplied by courage equaled freedom. The mathematics of love had changed. Across town, in a gentleman's club on Pall Mall, another equation took shape. Discipline as desire. Smoke curled through heavy air, perfumed with brandy and denial. Members called it a reading society, a code as transparent as the password whispered at the door. Upstairs, candles flickered over dark wood, illuminating cabinets lined with canes. Riding crops and polished implements displayed like sacred relics. The walls bore framed verses about virtue through pain, penned in elegant, hypocritical hands. Here, punishment had become performance. A magistrate quoted Latin about morality. An artist sketched the arc of a birch switch, calling it a study of movement. Their rhetoric trembled under its own decorum. One unrolled a velvet case of birch rods tied with ribbons, reciting about moderation. The room felt like confession, disguised as choreography. Historically, the setting rang true. In Victorian England, flagellation occupied a strange niche, preached in pulpits, prescribed by doctors, whispered in novels. Public schools and naval drills had taught boys that pain forged character. They grew into men who confused discipline with devotion. Publishers fed this appetite. Discreet catalogues listed the romance of chastisement and the whip of Eros, sermons spiced with sensation. Illustrations hid behind tissue paper, some by desperate artists, others by amateurs thrilled by secrecy. Bookshops in Holywell Street and Soho kept copies behind false drawers. When trials condemned them for obscenity, sales only climbed. A printer once swore the plates for a notorious title were destroyed. Yet they reappeared a year later under a new name, as if shame itself demanded resurrection. Inside the club, ritual governed pleasure. Whips warmed by the fire, strokes counted aloud like prayer. Purification, they called it. Outsiders would call it theater. Rules forbade cruelty, a paradox that heightened allure. Restraint was the game's true currency. Whether these societies were common or rare remains uncertain. Much evidence burned with their letters, but their spirit lingers in the literature of repentance and reward. Women entered these stories, mostly as archetypes: governess, nurse, penitent. High-class courtesans reinvented themselves as disciplinarians, teaching lessons in decorum that ended in play. They sold control to men who had been trained to crave it. Some actresses moonlighted as tutors in improving conduct. One, known as Clarice, became so renowned for her performances that she bought a boarding house for retired performers. Rumor claimed her pupils tipped better than theater patrons. Outside these elite salons, the fascination trickled down. In cheap brothels, household tools became props. Laughter mingled freely with pain. Here, no Latin was quoted, no philosophy invoked, only human improvisation. A chair turned throne, a belt became devotion. The same society that preached restraint could not resist dramatizing it. Whether in clubs or garrets, the ritual repeated. Confession, correction, relief. Medical journals occasionally stumbled into the subject under another guise: therapy. Case studies described restorative flagellation for hysteria, cloaking desire in diagnosis. Others prescribed stimulative discipline for melancholia. The language of science became an alibi for the language of sin. Historians still argue whether this blend of punishment and pleasure signified repression or release. Perhaps both. Beneath the veneer of moral control, Victorian culture had discovered its mirror image, desire articulated through the vocabulary of virtue. In the same decades that reformers taught families to plan, gentlemen learned to ritualize guilt. The contrast feels almost symmetrical. One side domesticates freedom, the other sanctifies control. Back in the city streets, the two currents coexist. Clinics distribute leaflets under gaslight. Upstairs, Hanes gleam beside decanters. Both are responses to the same tension: how to manage the body without surrendering the soul. Progress and perversion, restraint and release, each pretending to civilize the other. As night deepens, the line between sermon and spectacle fades entirely. The same society that trembles at the sight of a contraceptive sheath thrills at the sound of a polished whip. Between them lies the true paradox of the Victorian age, a culture desperate to appear pure, yet endlessly inventive in concealing its hunger. Joke number 3 whispers in the firelight. The louder a man preaches self-control, the likelier he is to have a membership card in his pocket. Behind oak doors and lace curtains alike, England rehearses the same lesson, that virtue and vice, far from enemies, often share the same stage. Doctors once prescribed spanking for melancholia or lethargy, claiming it restored circulation. Behind the clinical tone, something less medical stirred. One physician even recorded moral treatment by flagellation, each session precisely 15 minutes long. Joke number 3 flickered, the only therapy leaving both doctor and patient equally flushed. Art soon joined the performance. In private studios, models posed as Venus chastising Cupid, or nymphs disciplined for disobedience. The prints sold briskly as classical studies, collectors discussing lighting and composition with scholarly gravity. When police raided one collection, the official report called the images allegories of moral improvement. The officers kept straight faces only until the ink dried. The obsession with punishment reflected deeper hierarchies: empire, family, church, and classroom, each built on obedience and correction. To play at reversing those roles was a secret rehearsal for equality. Guilt sought its twin in surrender. No law could forbid it. Etiquette itself carried the seed of rebellion. When the candles guttered, the gentlemen's club dissolved into quiet farewells. Canes were packed away, curtains drawn, and London slept under gaslight, unaware of its moral theater behind oak doors. The moralists who built such restraint never foresaw that every knot tied for control would one day become a bow waiting to be undone. Down the street, a music hall pulsed with brass and laughter. Its marquee blinked through fog, drawing clerks, sailors, and factory girls hungry for escape. Inside, the orchestra burst into a bright march as a woman in top hat strode on stage, her grin wicked, her voice smoky. The audience roared before she sang a note. For a few minutes, gender melted into melody. Cross-dressing acts like Vesta Tilley's turned the stage into a laboratory of possibility, half comedy, half quiet revolution. She swaggered like a young officer, flirted with the balcony, and saluted the cheap seats. Critics praised her polish. Crowds adored her for living what they could only imagine. Respectability, it seemed, wore trousers after dark. Backstage, freedom smelled of powder, sweat, and possibility. Costumes hung like captured secrets. Wigs dangled from hooks like silent accomplices. One performer, tightening her waistcoat, whispered with a grin, "The trick isn't to imitate men, it's to imitate how men imagine themselves." Then, catching her reflection, she winked and added, "I've practiced their arrogance." The room rippled with quiet laughter, half admiration, half conspiracy, as the orchestra's cue echoed through the thin wooden walls. On stage, boundaries meant safely. Off stage, they would break reputations. Music halls became release valves for a society suffocating under propriety. Scholars later argued whether the laughter hid envy or desire. To those present, it hardly mattered. It was joy. The shows swung between sentimental ballads and sly burlesque. One parody of Hamlet ended with the heroine in breeches, sword raised, declaiming, "To be or not to be." As the crowd tossed coins onto the stage, the manager scooped them up like a fisherman hauling gold. Profit, as always, rewarded daring. Police reports turned comic. Arrested performers returned to court in even more outrageous attire, treating trials as free publicity. Judges scolded. Clerks blushed. Constables secretly booked tickets for research. Newspapers tried to denounce indecency, but ended up printing lyrics verbatim, ensuring sold-out nights. Beyond the stage, masked balls carried the same spirit. Aristocrats arrived in swapped attire. Gentlemen in corsets, ladies in hussar jackets. Under chandeliers, the boundaries of class and gender blurred until midnight. Servants gawked from the edges, half scandalized, half delighted. When masks fell, everyone pretended nothing had happened, though perfume lingered longer than denial. Working-class streets echoed the same defiance with less polish, more heart. Boys borrowed blouses to parody policemen. Girls donned caps to mock soldiers. For a few pennies and a hat, the world inverted itself. The cross-dressing gag became a satire of power, a way to borrow strength for a verse or two. Fashion followed theater. Tailors advertised walking suits for ladies, coats cut like men's frock jackets. Critics prophesied the fall of civilization under an invasion of trousers. The wearers simply enjoyed pockets. In photography studios, women posed in tailored coats, hands in pockets, faces serene. The prints, traded among friends, became quiet manifestos. Joke number 2 bloomed in the form of quiet rebellion. A woman, newly photographed in a tailored man's suit waistcoat crisp, hand-tucked casually into her pocket, decided to send her portrait to a suitor. On the back, she wrote with graceful mischief, "Now you may wear the corset." It was more than a jest. It was a declaration, folded in charm and ink, that the old order could be teased into surrender. Her words mocked constraint while celebrating the freedom to choose one's own shape, both in clothing and in life. The photograph, innocent to the untrained eye, carried the charge of transformation, a woman claiming posture, confidence, and control once reserved for men. The corset, symbol of restraint, had turned metaphor, and the laughter it sparked rippled quietly through drawing rooms and dark rooms alike. For some, the stage was not disguise, but revelation. Performers who never fit society's binary expectations found belonging in its make-believe. They lived their truth offstage, walking through London in the clothes that felt right. Gossip hinted, but never named. In Soho's bohemian enclaves, identity turned arc. Every life became a self-written script. Censors tried to restore order. They measured skirt lengths, banned lyrics, even counted gestures. The performers adapted faster. A wink replaced a line. A dance step said what words could not. The audience learned the code, each laugh a small act of rebellion. The theater became a secret democracy, where everyone knew more than the authorities. As midnight neared, the orchestra struck its final chord. Performers, some in skirts, others in uniforms, joined hands under the gaslight's gold haze. Together, they sang a rousing chorus about London's restless nights. The floor trembled with stamping feet. Balconies shook with applause. Looking around, you saw faces alight, not with lust or judgment, but gratitude for 2 hours of freedom rehearsed behind velvet curtains. The night outside would close in again, full of rules and sermons. But inside that brief blaze of laughter and song, the city had remembered how to breathe. When the music fades, the audience spills into the foggy streets, still humming the refrain. Mist curls around them like a second curtain. A woman in trousers tips her hat to a constable, who returns it unaware that he has saluted rebellion. Joke number 3 follows quietly, in the young man who whispers to his date that he plans to borrow her dress for next week's masquerade. She laughs, and somewhere above, a single star winks through the smoke, approving a performance that never truly ends. You pause outside a polished townhouse, curtains drawn tight. Inside, whispers ripple across the parlor. Men gather not for cards or politics, but for safety, their lives stitched together by secrecy. Writers, clerks, artists, students all live dual existences. A single anxiety binds them, the law that criminalizes their love. In this country, male affection is not merely frowned upon. It can bring prison and disgrace. Crossing the threshold, you feel the air thick with fear and relief. The strange calm of a hidden congregation. The conversation begins softly. A poem about friendship is read, each line hovering between sincerity and disguise. The audience understands the spaces between words. It is an Irish author whose wit has made London laugh for years, though laughter now carries danger. Oscar Wilde, playwright and master of epigram, has become the symbol of everything the law despises and everything beauty demands. His trial for gross indecency transforms private lives into courtroom theater. A mainstream fact underlines it. The 1885 Labouchere Amendment criminalizes sexual acts between men. So vaguely worded, it polices affection as easily as intimacy. Newspapers devour every detail of Wilde's trial. Headlines scream of vice, immorality, betrayal. Admirers cross the street to avoid his friends. The theater community masks grief with forced jokes. Some claim ignorance, others burn letters. Presses pound through the night, each sheet lashing reputations. When the verdict arrives, 2 years' hard labor the crowd outside cheers, while inside a silence heavier than justice hangs. Historians still debate whether society condemned him for wit, words, or his refusal to apologize. In smaller rooms, sympathy finds quieter expression. Groups of men meet in secrecy, reading Plato and Whitman, seeking language to name themselves without shame. Calling themselves the Uranians, inspired by the ancient Greek idea of spiritual male love. They circulate verses privately, hand-copied, never sold. One poet describes affection as friendship daring to breathe. Joke number 1 surfaces when a young man remarks that Plato would have been horrified to see his dialogues smuggled in brown paper like contraband tea. Policing extends into every corner of life. Boarding houses post notices refusing single male tenants of uncertain habits. Clubs bar those named in rumor. Employers dismiss workers on suspicion alone. Fear saturates the air like tobacco smoke. Men exchange glances on street corners, vanish into crowds. Private letters burn nightly, reducing tenderness to ash. Courage becomes measured by mere existence. Yet even in oppression, communities form. Certain pubs in Soho and the East End provide shelter after dark. In dim back rooms, laughter rises cautiously above a piano. Some dance with bolted doors. Others simply talk, grateful for language free of disguise. These gatherings are not rebellions, merely brief respites. A quirky tidbit glows in police reports. Raids often confiscate only wine bottles and sheet music. Paperwork describes improper assemblies, yet the only crime committed is joy. Wilde's imprisonment echoes across Europe. Artists and intellectuals debate morality in cafes, quoting his aphorisms as if summoning courage through elegance. Younger men adopt his defiant dandism velvet lapels, green carnations, polished wit. The flower becomes a coded emblem. To insiders, solidarity. To outsiders, mere fashion. Historians debate whether Wilde created the meaning of his symbol or if admirers bestowed it. Yet the green carnation bloomed stubbornly through fear. The love that dare not speak its name, borrowed from Lord Alfred Douglas, haunts conversation like a ghost. Newspapers brand it corruption. Among friends, it becomes a mantra of endurance. Lovers write in private letters that silence can still speak. One preserved attic note reads simply, "If it cannot speak, it still breathes." Science claims neutrality, classifying what the law condemns. Medical men collect case studies of sexual inversion, treating affection as pathology. Some volunteer. Others are exposed unwillingly. Joke number 2 arises when a reader notes the doctors seem more obsessed than their patients. Amid persecution, art continues to flourish. Painters depict idealized male nudes under the classical revival, while poets veil longing in saints and sailors. Stage plays embed double meanings about friendship and loyalty. Audiences laugh, unaware of hidden confessions. Courage in these coded gestures is measured in persistence. Rumors spread of exiles sailing to France or Italy, where cafes and studios form networks of affection and creativity. Letters carry gossip, philosophy, and requests for aid. Some return when scandal cools. Others never do. London feigns forgetfulness, yet Wilde's influence endures in salons and galleries. Released and broken, he retreats to France under a false name, writing for a shrinking, loyal audience. His words, "Each man kills the thing he loves," echo long after. As the century turns, laws persist, but whispers of friendship and quiet rebellion grow bolder. Small presses circulate quietly, distributing booklets through trusted hands. Readers hide them under mattresses, hearts quick with recognition. Across the empire, seeds of visibility spread silently. As dusk falls, the parlor empties. Men exchange hurried handshakes, lamps dimmed until only the fireplace glows. Outside, the city seems unchanged, yet a stubborn warmth persists. Love refuses fear. Joke number 3 flickers as a guest murmurs while buttoning his coat. If love must be unspeakable, it can still hum a tune. The melody drifts into the fog, fragile but brave, outlasting the night. In a candlelit drawing room, lace curtains filter street lamps into trembling halos. Two women sit close on a velvet sofa, hands nearly touching, speaking in whispers that finish each other's sentences. Poetry, travel, scandal, they move through it all. Yet an invisible thread hums beneath. Affection cloaked as friendship, intimacy in gloves. Diaries call it romantic friendship, a quiet language of endurance, subtle rebellion, and steadfast courage. The phrase sounds proper enough to pass in parlors. It conceals entire worlds of feeling. Women write to one another with tenderness that would raise eyebrows if addressed to men. They exchange rings, share beds during visits, calling each other my dearest, my heart, my only comfort. English law criminalizes sex between men, but not women. The assumption that women lack desire becomes camouflage, offering both protection and invisibility. Upstairs, letters are stored in a blue-ribboned box, each faintly scented with pressed flowers. They invent a coded language. I miss your sunlight means longing. The weather has turned gray signals loneliness. Ordinary enough to survive a maid's glance, yet sustaining their hearts for weeks, these letters blend secrecy and devotion. Historians still debate whether these friendships were purely emotional or quietly physical. But ambiguity shields them from scrutiny. Beyond parlors, a parallel world hums in women's colleges such as Girton and Somerville. Students pace gardens, in heavy wool skirts, reciting Greek verse, forging intellectual companionship as currency. Professors call it sisterhood, students call it freedom. Letters blur admiration and love. Many graduates remain lifelong companions, living together as friends of the family or as cohabitants in shared households. Neighbors may guess, but politeness forbids inquiry. Joke number one tiptoes in when one lady observes that spinsterhood is simply marriage, with fewer arguments about curtains. Artists capture these relationships in oils. Painters depict women reading together by lamplight, shoulders brushing, eyes tender with shared thought. Poets describe souls twinned beyond the limits of language. The public calls such works sentimental. The participants recognize survival within them. The salon becomes their stage, the letter their love song. Even fashion nods to defiance. Short. Hair tucked under wide-brimmed hats, tailored jackets borrowed from brothers, loosened corsets permitting breath and movement. Gossip columns sparkle with anecdotes. A duchess commissions matching lockets containing curls of hair, one from herself, one from her closest companion. The jeweler, unsure whether to classify it as a wedding token or trinket, delivers it under the label ornament. Society chooses not to interpret further. Discretion becomes the tax of affection. Psychology soon intrudes. Doctors diagnose inversion in women pursuing intellectual or masculine interests. Case studies appear in continental journals. Women living together, sharing finances, devoted to each other more than the propagation of the race. The tone is both patronizing and fascinated. One can almost hear physicians struggling to reconcile tenderness with doctrine. Joke number two flickers when a suffragist reads such an article aloud at tea, remarking, "At least they call us harmless now." Progress of a sort. Politics sharpens affection into alliance. The women's suffrage movement attracts many who already share homes and hearts. Working in pairs becomes both strategy and shield. Marching side by side, women blur the line between comrade and beloved. Newspapers ridicule their mannish determination, yet photographs reveal gentleness. Faces shine with purpose, hands clasped in solidarity. Love expresses itself in shared labor when speech is risky. Private households mirror public rebellion. In small towns, widows and unmarried women buy cottages together, plant gardens, share expenses, quietly reshaping domestic life. Called Boston marriages, these arrangements spark curiosity and envy. Independence holds its own allure. Strong tea, unrestrained laughter. Literature mirrors reality. Female characters in love appear more openly than their counterparts. Two women walking arm in arm through the countryside may rehearse devotion exceeding conventional courtship. Historians debate whether these depictions are coded or sentimental, reflecting the fluid, variable nature of human affection. The parlor returns to quiet. Women lean close, studying a sheet of music, voices mingling in hums. Carriage wheels splash through puddles outside. Time pauses. Departure will separate them. One to visit family, the other to tend a household, yet their gazes promise reunion. Power lies in secrecy. Law or rumor cannot break it. In the morning, one walks her friend to a carriage. Hands clasped longer than necessary. To any onlooker, only courtesy. Wheels splash mud against the curb. She returns, holding the blue-ribboned box of letters, smiling at her reflection. Joke number 3 drifts softly. If accused of loving too deeply, she will plead guilty with grace. Silence surrounds the house. Her heart hums like a hidden violin. Across town, another curtain closes on another set of confidants. The city sleeps, believing it understands its daughters. It does not. Behind lace windows, thousands of secret symphonies play on, written in ink that refuses to fade. You step inside a study lined with notebooks, skull diagrams, and glass jars, preserving specimens resembling unanswered questions. The room belongs to a new breed of investigator, calling himself a sexologist. He adjusts spectacles, scribbles in neat handwriting, documenting habits people barely admit. Morality's curiosity transforms into measurement. Desire, once the domain of priests, now belongs to scientists armed with rulers, questionnaire, and astonishing confidence. Ink and disinfectant mingle in the air. On the desk, thick folders labeled case histories contain anonymous testimonies. A schoolmaster describes inexplicable dreams. A widow records pulse rhythms after poetry. A factory worker wonders whether affection for a friend is illness or blessing. Each writer hopes the doctor will respond with absolution, disguised as data. By the 1892 seconds, physicians such as Havelock Ellis in England and Richard von Krafft-Ebing in Germany published detailed studies of human sexuality, replacing sin with taxonomy. Gossip becomes documentation. Scandal transforms into charts. The process feels part laboratory, part confessional. Patients describe acts and emotions, once without vocabulary. Words like inversion, perversion, autoeroticism slip from Latin into everyday speech. Lexicon grows faster than understanding. Some doctors treat letters with empathy, others with horror. Scientific tone cannot fully hide fascination. When Ellis reads a careful account of same-sex affection, he murmurs at its poetry. His assistant blushes, noting subjective enthusiasm. Joke number 1 surfaces. Perhaps poetry is the more efficient science. Appetite for knowledge reaches into dreams. Influenced by neurology and early psychology, researchers attempt to decode desire through subconscious imagery. Patients recount nightmares of labyrinths, staircases, mirrors. Each symbol receives a diagnosis. A man dreaming of water, labeled anxious about purity. A woman dreaming of keys, told she hides forbidden knowledge. Science transforms confession into language, data, and diagrams, bridging morality and measurement, codifying hidden worlds while fascination persists. The conclusions of this era were as inventive as the very dreams researchers sought to categorize. Historians still debate whether this fervent analysis represented genuine scientific progress or merely another attempt to cage mystery within equations. In any case, the century's faith in classification meant that even desire and longing had to wear a label. Photography joined this project, recording humanity in ways that were at once scientific and artistic in small clinics. Physicians posed subjects against neutral backdrops, cataloging the physical traits thought to indicate deviance. The resulting images looked more like art than medicine. Men stood rigidly next to measuring sticks, while women gazed into the middle distance, as if confessing secrets. Each photograph captured vulnerability more than pathology. Researchers believed they were mapping the terrain of temptation, but what they truly recorded was human variation. Rendered in sepia tones. Archives reveal many models for these studies were artists, moonlighting to earn extra income, fully aware they were labeled unusual, yet unfazed. Books from this period combined revelation and theater. Krafft-Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis listed hundreds of case studies, from tragic to absurd, becoming a bestseller among doctors and lawyers eager to appear learned, while private readers feigned medical curiosity. Latin passages intended to deter casual readers only heightened interest. Ellis's later studies in the psychology of sex took a gentler approach, treating variation as natural. The era balanced punitive and compassionate voices. Public lectures illustrated this tension. A physician promised detachment, while describing the nervous system with metaphors of fire and machinery to an audience of clergymen, suffragists, and nervous students. His gestures grew dramatic. At one point, he dropped his pointer, prompting laughter. A woman in the front row whispered that his enthusiasm would make even a bishop blush. The laughter released tension, proving that education could be more thrilling than the lecturer intended. While scientists dissected passion, writers translated it into philosophy. Intellectual salons debated whether love should be measured or merely experienced. Some argued that understanding desire rationally could free society from hypocrisy. Others feared that analysis would destroy wonder. The debate seemed endless, yet essential. Artists present predictably ignored both sides, painting as they pleased. Canvases depicting intertwined figures hung under the label allegory of nature. Critics debated technique, while visitors lingered too long to simply admire brushwork. Meanwhile, reformers borrowed medical language to advocate tolerance. If attraction was innate, they reasoned, punishment was illogical. Early advocates for homosexual rights in Europe cited Ellis's research to argue that difference was not disease. The press mocked them, yet the idea persisted. Language originally designed for control began to nurture liberation. This shift from moral to biological explanations also seeped into ordinary households. Popular magazines published quizzes to determine readers' temperaments, choleric, melancholic, or amorous. Readers mailed answers to editors, who promised guidance. The self became an experiment. Privacy turned analytical. One woman wrote that she finally felt seen. Another complained that her husband now categorized her moods like the weather. The scientific spirit infiltrated breakfast conversation. Medical students debated ethics. Should one observe or participate to understand passion? The question provoked nervous laughter. Professors insisted on distance, yet the temptation of experience proved irresistible. Rumors circulated of private research involving mirrors and questions that made even physicians blush. By the end of the decade, Ellis sat by lamplight, reviewing letters from grateful readers who thanked him for giving words to what they feared was madness. He wrote back, gently urging self-acceptance. Outside his window, London hummed with its usual mixture of virtue and vice. He realized that understanding desire might never tame it, but knowledge could replace superstition. The idea was revolutionary in its quiet calm. Stepping into the foggy street, gaslights blurred like half-formed thoughts. Behind each curtained window, someone read, wondered, and measured their own heart against the pages. Curiosity had become courage. The age of classification could not extinguish mystery. It only taught it to speak in new dialects. You enter a narrow clinic tucked behind a red brick terrace, where the smell of incense mingles with candle wax. A brass plaque reads, Dr. Shaw, Medical Advice for Women. The waiting room holds a few anxious faces, bonnets in laps, boots damp from rain. Conversations fall silent each time the door opens. The air carries both desperation and determination. Behind the curtain, Dr. Shaw, a woman in her 30s with steady eyes, takes careful notes, defying a culture that still confined women to midwifery or charity. Medicine was beginning to change its face, though not its tone. Female physicians fought for legitimacy in lecture halls filled with skepticism. Their achievements opened paths narrow enough to stumble over, but wide enough for courage. Dr. Shaw listens to a patient describing fainting spells, headaches, and what she calls a dragging melancholy. She recognizes the symptoms of exhaustion, hunger, and fear disguised as delicacy. Victorian medicine loved labels: hysteria, paresis, nervous prostration, polite words for the toll of confinement. Treatments prescribed by male doctors typically enforced rest, bed confinement, and removal from intellectual activity. Dr. Shaw, however, took a radical approach: exercise, companionship, and nourishing broths. She wrote her instructions with calm authority, leaving patients' eyes wide with surprise. The clinic smelled of lavender, rebellion hiding in plain sight. Humor surfaced when she stressed avoiding moral lectures. They aggravated nerves. In another room, a cabinet of polished steel speculums, glass syringes, and tiny scalpels rested like silver fish, symbols of both progress and intrusion. The medical profession's fascination with the female body bordered on obsession, detailing anatomy while ignoring emotion. Dr. Shaw treated patients others refused, discreetly assisted by a midwife. Abortions remained illegal, yet demand persisted. Apothecary shelves held tonics, powders, and herbs, some harmless, others poisonous. Rumors whispered that secrecy often profited pharmacists more than the cures themselves. A young seamstress entered, face pale beneath soot-dark curls, clutching her abdomen, whispering her predicament. Dr. Shaw offered a chair, tea, and options. They spoke quietly for an hour. When the woman left, she carried pain relief medicine and instructions to rest. If discovered, Dr. Shaw would be labeled reckless, yet her records documented acts of mercy. The tension between compassion and law vibrated through the wooden floorboards, palpable in every corner of the clinic. The city's male physicians spoke on women's health with theatrical certainty, blaming nearly every ailment on the womb, as if it dictated morality. One lecturer claimed excessive reading diverted blood from reproduction to intellect, earning applause. A journalist later warned that female education must proceed cautiously to protect maturity. Joke number 2 emerged when students graffitied his poster: "Caution intellect may cause thinking." Hospitals opened gynecology wards where patients whispered about treatments resembling punishment. Surgeons tested new instruments, aiming pain necessary for progress. Anesthesia existed, but was scarce, and recovery rooms echoed with groans. Innovation and moral blindness coexisted paradoxically. Yet in small offices like Dr. Shaw's, the tone shifted. Care became a dialogue rather than a decree. She listened more than she spoke, understanding that half of healing was granting permission to speak the truth aloud. Birth itself remained a battlefield between tradition and science. Experienced midwives were increasingly displaced by male obstetricians armed with forceps and certificates. Some collaborated, others resisted. A midwife named Clara, Dr. Shaw's ally, insisted that skill could not be measured by Latin terms. She recounted delivering children in cramped tenements by lamplight, her hands steady while thunder shook the roof. When officials accused her of quackery, her patients defended her fiercely. A petition signed on flour-stained paper saved her from prison. The contrast between parchment law and kitchen courage felt like a sermon in plain English. Meanwhile, new medical theories linked women's nerves to social roles. Doctors claimed motherhood protected against insanity, while spinsterhood invited it. Widows who remained independent were prescribed travel to the seaside for moral equilibrium. In Dr. Shaw's waiting room, A widow read a newspaper with a defiant smile, recently returned from Brighton, tanned and unrepentant. Historians still debate how far women doctors could advance before establishment pushback. Some opened hospitals entirely staffed by women. Others published manuals advocating sanitary living and education rather than moral lectures. Progress was uneven, yet the mere presence of female physicians altered expectations. Patients left with medicine and glimpses of a world where care required no apology. As evening fell, Dr. Shaw extinguished the lamps and wrote her final note. A patient had smiled for the first time in weeks. Pausing, she dipped her pen again and added, "Perhaps healing begins with being believed." Outside, rain tapped against window panes and carriages rattled by, carrying doctors who would scorn her methods and patients who would quietly bless them. She locked the door, adjusted her hat, and stepped into the fog, black bags swinging lightly. Joke number 3 hummed in her mind, imagining the next skeptical gentleman. She would likely prescribe humility. Lamplight glinted on her spectacles as she vanished, leaving the house breathing, the calm rhythm of a revolution disguised as compassion. You walked through fog toward a small townhouse where laughter spilled from half-drawn curtains. Inside, women in tailored suits passed teacups and discussed anatomy with mischievous precision. A discreet sign on the door read, "Ladies Literary." Circle tonight, the only reading concerns the mysteries of pleasure, not profession. The host, a widow named Mrs. Redfern, moved gracefully among her guests, refilling cups with cherry liquid instead of tea. Her salon had become an unofficial classroom for knowledge respectable society pretended did not exist. Around the table lay open books on the human body, diagrams torn from medical journals, and a few imported texts wrapped in brown paper. The women laughed at awkward phrasing from male authors, who described female desire as though it were a rare disease. The women shared stories of doctors, prescribing cold baths and tonics for overexcitement. Mrs. Redfern leaned forward, eyes bright, whispering that ignorance was the true illness, and the room hummed with agreement. Formal education in women's sexual health during the Victorian era was nearly non-existent. What knowledge existed passed only through whispers, midwives, and courage disguised as curiosity. A young schoolteacher, Harriet, produced a small wooden box from her handbag. Inside was a smooth metal device resembling a miniature rolling pin. The women giggled nervously until she explained it was a portable massager, meant for nervous exhaustion. Plugging it into a small battery pack, the room erupted into astonished laughter. The device hummed like a bee trapped in a bottle. Joke number 1 danced in the air when someone remarked it could cure both nerves and boredom. Harriet blushed but kept it running. The conversation shifted to the politics of information. Newspapers warned against self-indulgence while simultaneously advertising restorative devices. Pharmacies displayed glass bottles labeled "Elixir of Tranquility," promising relief from unspoken tension. Mrs. Redfern recounted a woman arrested for distributing marital hygiene pamphlets, the same advice her husband's physician gave to male patients under private advice. The double standard remained as sturdy as oak. Letters from housewives revealed cautious wonder. Intimacy improved when women understood their own bodies, and newlyweds shared discoveries with sisters behind veils of duty. Medical technology had become the era's unexpected accomplice. Vibrators, first designed to treat hysteria, became smaller and quieter with each passing decade. Advertisements showed respectable women applying them to their temples for facial rejuvenation. Everyone understood the secret, yet the discreet code persisted. Gossip spread of manufacturers, claiming these devices stimulated circulation, improving complexions. Slogans appeared in beauty catalogs, quietly generating fortunes. In the salon, the ladies exchanged homemade remedies and theories. Lavender, oil, saltwater baths, and discussions of muscles instead of modesty treating satisfaction as healthful rather than sinful. Their conversations carried the thrill of trespassing into forbidden territory, yet felt intimate and domestic. Amid laughter, relief hid. They were slowly building a language for themselves, word by careful word. Outside, thunder rumbled over London roofs and rain tapped against the windows. Mrs. Redfern lit more candles, opened another bottle, and her cat wound through skirts, purring like an accomplice. She read aloud from a French manual on conjugal happiness, leaving nothing out. The audience listened, rapt. Joke number 2. Hovered when she advised slow, deliberate study of one's partner, prompting a seamstress to murmur that at her age she might require a full semester. As the evening deepened, discussion turned reflective, touching on guilt, centuries of silence, and the quiet acknowledgement of Dr. Shaw as a heroine of compassion. They spoke her name with gratitude, not gossip, as evidence that care could be kind. In the candlelit parlor, understanding flowed like oxygen, filling spaces long denied. Knowledge no longer belonged solely to men with diplomas or preachers with microphones. It belonged to all willing to listen. A sudden knock froze laughter. Imagining discovery, scandal, or ruin, the women paused. The maid opened the door to a drenched messenger carrying a crate of books. Relief flooded the room. The parcel, shipped from Paris, contained manuals hidden among philosophy volumes. They tore it open with scholarly enthusiasm, inhaling the sharp scent of ink and paper like triumph. The courier refused payment, murmuring that his sister had once attended these gatherings, making the connection feel sacred. As rain eased, the women wrapped contraband books in shawls, exchanging quick embraces. Mrs. Redfern lingered, smiling at their courage. "One day," she whispered, "we won't need secrets." After the last guest left, you remained in the dim parlor, candles low, a massager humming faintly. Joke number 3 danced in your mind. The room seemed alive with invisible applause, each confession rewriting history, while the cat curled among discarded pamphlets, purring as if claiming the quiet revolution for itself. The air smelled of cherry rain and something new. Pleasure, once veiled in euphemism, could exist unapologetically. You entered a grand Victorian bathhouse, ceilings steaming like fogged cathedrals, walls glimmering turquoise. Water splashed into marble basins, echoing like applause. Men and women arrived separately, wrapped in thick towels, ready to shed soot and pretense. Whispers traveled faster than steam. Cleanliness had become moral currency. Soap signified virtue, sold by the bar. By the 1870s, public baths and washhouses flourished across Britain, turning once filthy cities into spaces of purity, where morality clung to skin like condensation. Posters reminded visitors to behave modestly, bathe quietly, and treat cleanliness as half religion, half recreation. You followed a woman named Eleanor into the women's wing. The room smelled of eucalyptus oil and ambition. She removed her corset with a sigh like rebellion. Attendants poured water from copper jugs, faces flushed from heat. A piano tinkled faintly in a neighboring parlor, where the well-to-do sipped mineral water and discussed the healing power of Turkish steam. Bathing had become both necessity and theater. Joke number 1 bubbled when one bather insisted that steam opened the pores of the soul, and another replied hers already felt drafty enough. For the working class, bathing was humbler but transformative. In public washhouses, families queued for hot water cubicles costing only pennies. Mothers scrubbed children, men shaved with precision, and gossip replaced incense. Cleanliness promised dignity, even without wealth. Some washes offered soap tokens after hygiene lectures, linking morality to lather. Victorian obsession extended beyond skin. Manuals urged women to cleanse home, mind, and spirit. A spotless household proved character. Yet anxiety lingered contamination from poorer districts, immigrants, or unfamiliar scents. Middle-class bathing became a performative shield, separating disease, class, and virtue. Historians debate whether Victorian sanitation campaigns improved health or enforced new standards of respectability. Indoor plumbing transformed bathing. Tin tubs and servants gave way to porcelain baths with flowing water, creating private sanctuaries. Bathtubs became sites of self-awareness, ornate with clawed feet and gleaming faucets. Home hydrotherapy, with scented salts, promised vigor and virtue. Eleanor drew a zinc tub by the fireplace each Saturday, steam fogging windows as her cat twitched and she hummed off-key hymns. Bathing required discretion. Mixed bathing was scandalous, though wooden machines let women enter the sea unseen. Joke number 2. A man learned to swim chasing a lady in striped wool. Victorian science framed cleanliness as moral duty. Doctors linked hygiene to health, preachers to the soul. Soap replaced scripture, virtue measured by fragrance. Pears and sunlight advertised cherubic children, proclaiming cleanliness equals godliness. Campaigns judged decency by smell. Perfume counters overflowed. Bathhouses became social hubs where men discussed politics, cricket, and propriety, while steam blurred hierarchies and desire. Visitors sought hygiene, solitude, or shared silence. Attendants ignored intimate laughter. Police raids were rare. Historians debate whether these spaces offered sanctuary or subtle surveillance. Yet within steam, freedom briefly existed. Eleanor finished her bath, reclining on a marble bench wrapped in linen. Around her, women discussed recipes, children, and the latest penny press scandal. Conversation turned to whether frequent bathing weakened the Constitution. An elderly matron swore she bathed once a week for 40 years without catching cold. Younger women exchanged skeptical glances. Progress clashed with nostalgia. Bath culture extended into leisure. Health resorts advertised mineral springs promising fertility, courage, or smoother complexions. At Bath and Buckton, guests sipped sulfur water with explorer-like bravery. The smell resembled rotten eggs, yet fashion endured. Spa towns hosted orchestras, promenades, and flirtations disguised as therapy. Wealthy visitors called it convalescence. Locals called it theater with towels. Back in London, night settled over rooftops as attendants swept puddles and polished brass taps. Eleanor stepped into the street, skin flushed, spirit lifted, her reflection glowing in a shop window of soaps wrapped like gifts. She smiled, warmth radiating through her coat. At the alley's end, 2 children splashed in a puddle, laughter brighter than lamplight. Joke number 3 surfaced. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but puddles made better toys. The city glistened under drizzle, water running through gutters and pipes. Erasing soot, but not the human need to feel renewed. You entered a bright 1898 photography studio, dust sparkling like sugar under skylights. Wooden tripods stood like sentinels, brass lenses gleaming. The photographer, in a chemical-stained waistcoat, positioned his subjects with care, hand on a chair, eyes just above the lens. Seconds stretched into eternity as he instructed stillness. The click felt like the future capturing a heartbeat. By the late 19th century, portrait studios multiplied across Europe and America, making images affordable keepsakes for families and lovers alike. Beneath the respectable trade, a secret market thrived. Private collectors paid extra for photographs of models in mythological costumes or nothing at all. In the studio's backroom, velvet drapes softened light. 2 women posed by painted clouds, fabrics slipping, exchanging knowing smiles, while the photographer murmured that art required bravery that commanded double the price. Joke number 1 glimmers when one visitor asks whether the cherubs painted on the wall will avert their eyes. The photographer pretends to check the framing but grins behind the lens. The resulting image is labeled allegory, not scandal. Prints of Spring's Awakening or Diana at Rest circulate quietly among collectors who insist they buy them for artistic study. Dealers hide the images between landscapes and architecture scenes, selling only to trusted clients. Historians still debate whether such works constitute pornography, fine art, or anthropology. Often, the distinction depends more on the viewer than the composition. A critic admiring brushstrokes sees culture. A policeman observing skin sees crime. New technology accelerates desire. Gelatin dry plates make photography portable and swift. Amateur enthusiasts rent rooms to capture anatomy under the guise of education. Some experiments produce art, others chaos. Blurred figures caught mid-movement, intimate gestures frozen and awkward, expand what can be imagined. Trade catalogs reveal quirky details. Portable darkroom tents advertised to preserve modesty in fieldwork. The sentence that made professionals laugh remains unprinted. Women appear on both sides of the lens. Madame Yevande, a disciplined yet mysterious photographer, captures society ladies in heroic poses, while others document poverty, domestic life, or private gestures of affection. Unsigned works reveal tenderness untouched by male instruction. The revolution lies in the grain of photographic paper. Women use cameras to frame themselves rather than be framed. Photography reshapes flirtation. Lovers exchange cartes de visite with handwritten notes, initials, or inked kisses. Studio portraits become tokens and confessions. A soldier sends a photo to a sweetheart. If I fall, keep this as proof I once stood straight. A woman tucks a friend's image into a prayer book. Sacred and secret blend. Joke number 2 emerges when a couple is caught too close to the lens. The photographer clears his throat, claiming decency requires focus. The photograph unsettles philosophers. Some deem it mechanical magic. Others fear it steals the soul. Preachers warn vanity thrives in self-imaging, while artists argue seeing oneself creates empathy. Opinions circle endlessly, mirrored by the next. Meanwhile, photographers keep clicking. The world begins to collect itself in boxes of light and shadow. Families display portraits of babies and ancestors on mantels, proof that time can be paused. In poorer districts, itinerant photographers capture laborers, mothers with infants, and sailors leaving for voyages. Faded prints become heirlooms, outlasting the lives they depict. Photography transforms performance. Double exposures allow a single figure to appear twice, embracing themselves. Audiences gasp. Spirits in chemistry teach unanticipated lessons. The self is plural, layered, never fully visible dot in another room. Rejected prints show laughter mid-burst, half-closed eyes, smiles too private for public display. Imperfection feels more alive than polished portraits. The photographer explains accidents occur when subjects breathe or move. You think silently. Breathing is what makes them beautiful. Evening falls. The last customer departs. Gas lamps extinguished, the red glow of the developing room illuminates trays where shapes emerge slowly. Hands clasping, faces turned toward unseen light. Images bloom like memories finding courage to appear. Truth, he believes, has finally been captured. Yet truth shifts with every gaze. A finished print depicts a woman looking directly into the camera, calm, fearless. Presence, not allegory, dominates. Joke number 3 ripples. The camera steals the power to feign innocence. Outside, electric lamps begin replacing gas. Pedestrians splash through puddles, reflections flickering like negatives. Behind every shuttered window, someone studies a hidden portrait. The age of secrecy learns to see itself. The gaze returned is unafraid. You enter Clarara's parlor, lace curtains drifting in afternoon light, tea cooling beside a vase of lilacs. The clock ticks faintly, marking the century's closing seconds. Its inhabitants sense change, not fully understanding it. A new century approaches, knocking in modern shoes, asking impolite questions. Clara, a widow of comfortable means, rents rooms to students and visiting writers, who bring stories from across London. Suffragists marching, artists painting, engineers discussing flying machines. She listens, amused by progress noise. Her walls, once lined with family portraits, now showcase sketches by tenants. Faces and bodies drawn honestly, not flattered. The parlor becomes a gallery of small rebellions disguised as decoration. One afternoon, a young journalist visits, notebook in hand, expecting tales of scandal. Clara offers biscuits and asks what he truly seeks. He stammers about virtue, about balancing respectability with desire. She laughs. Balance requires acknowledging the scales. Joke number 1 ripples as he writes without smudging ink. Outside, carriages rattle, soon replaced by motor cars. Electricity flickers in houses, delivering quiet thrills. Light without flame, heat without soot, power without confession. People read, write, and dream at night. Private and public life blur with every late-lit bulb. Historians debate whether illumination liberated or exposed, but shadows no longer obey old commands. Clara's tenants gather for supper, a medical student, painter, typist, and poet reading aloud. Conversations drift from politics to passion, wages to marriage. The typist notes women now earn pay. The student counters that medicine cures nearly everything except loneliness. The painter jokes love remains incurable. Toasts mix humor with earnestness. Upstairs, the air smells faintly of varnish and roses. A photograph spins. Waltz music blooms. Tenants dance, partners chosen regardless of gender or permission. Clara smiles, recognizing authenticity, not scandal. Furniture protests quietly, but floorboards adapt to new rhythms. Outside, rooftops shimmer under early electric light, chimneys like fading relics, wires strung with possibility. Across drawing rooms, corsets loosen, curtains open, voices rise. A generation raised on whispers begins speaking aloud. Newspapers scold less. Knowledge travels via pamphlet and rumor faster than sermons. Curiosity spreads contagiously. The journalist asks if Clara fears the future. She pours tea, smiles, repeats, "Fear? No, the century has feared enough. The next will be curious." Historians may argue over progress and morality, but here, transformation begins with laughter. Children ride bicycles in parks, women read aloud on trains, men write letters unhidden by irony. Artists sketch bodies, scientists discuss instincts. Sin's vocabulary sounds antique. Choice and freedom grow with conversation. Evening deepens. Clara lights a lamp, opens her window. Music drifts from a nearby cafe. The Victorian whisper ends. Honesty murmurs slowly and luminously. End of script. Sweet dreams.